Good morning. Happy Halloween morning. We are going to start with introductions of those that I believe to be online virtually, starting with Amy. Do you want to say hi to the group, unmute, and any opening thoughts?
Good morning. Sorry I'm not there in person. I think my opening thoughts are I am looking forward to this meeting to dive a little deeper into the substance of our conversations that is specifically focused on accessory dwelling units. I know that Joe asked those of us who submitted some local documentation to discuss it, which I will do very briefly when that time arises on the agenda. But just to say that I think a lot of jurisdictions have focused on affordable housing, but maybe not specifically on accessory dwelling units. So I'm looking forward to this dialogue beginning today.
Great, thanks, Amy. And can you remind everyone your affiliation, what group you're representing on the task force?
Yes. So again, I am Amy Mordock. I'm the planning director in Queen Anne's County, and I'm representing the Mako Planners affiliate on this group.
Wonderful, thank you. If everyone could do that, that just helps us because everyone's here providing a particular perspective as was carefully chosen by the General Assembly with this legislation. So I'm going to go to Delegate Stewart next. If you could go ahead and introduce yourself and any opening comments you'd like to make.
Sure. I'll just simply say I'm Delegate Vaughn Stewart. I'm the representative from the Maryland House of Delegates. It's great to be here, albeit virtually. I really enjoyed the discussion last time we had a meeting, and I look forward to continuing this productive dialogue.
Great, thank you, and thanks for being online with us. And then Quinn, you're out there. I'm trying to get all of these rosters together. If you could introduce yourself and any opening comments.
Yes, good morning. Quinn Griffith. I'm with the law firm of Whiteford, Taylor, and Preston. I am barred in Maryland, and I am on the task force as a representative of the Chesapeake chapter of CAI, which is the Community Associations Institute. Again, just as the first meeting, happy to participate here today, and I look forward to a very thoughtful and planned discussion. So thank you.
Great, Quinn. Thanks for joining us. And for those task force members virtually, I can't actually see you, so I'll be dependent on the staff when we have discussions for you to raise your hand, or if there's any issues along the way to be able to raise your hand so that we know you're out there. And we want to make sure you're able to engage in the conversation. Senator, come on in over here. Which side? Here we are. Joe, while you're there, I'm going to pass this off and we'll just move this around the room so everyone can start their introduction.
Good morning, everyone. James Gaston III, also known as the Riddler. I am here celebrating Halloween like all people should on this wonderful day. And we're going to talk about accessory dwelling units. I am looking forward to the discussion. I am with the town of Brentwood, Maryland.
Hi, I'm Priscilla Cania. I'm with AARP, and this is a high priority for us. So I'm thrilled to be on this task force.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Ray. I am a certified planner and have spent my professional career as a transportation planner and continue to look forward to move this conversation forward, very much so in the auspice of the additional impacts on our infrastructure and how we ensure that that is handled, excuse me, properly.
Hi, my name is Mandy Gitt. I am with the Maryland Coalition of Interior Designers. I'm a certified interior designer in the state of Maryland, and today I'm hoping to discuss the importance of building code and providing safe spaces. And if we have time, I'm happy to discuss the design process when you undertake a project like this.
Good morning. I am Tiffany Harris, broker owner with Harris Hawkins & Co., and I am here representing the Maryland Association of Realtors.
Hi, I'm Dan Hoff. I'm here from the city of Westminster, representing the Maryland Municipal League.
Hi, Theo Williams with the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development, and excited to be continuing this conversation.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Senator Mary Washington. It's my fault that you're here on this wonderful meeting. No, I drafted the legislation. I was the sponsor of the bill. And it's wonderful to see, you know, I intentionally wanted to have interior designers because I've met your association and really thought that that was, you know, very important to understand how these might work. And then also having all of the different stakeholders, it's really important, this conversation. And having everyone at the table, and I'm sure the chair has said this, it's that, you know, we get better policy when we hear as many voices as possible, and that we come to agreement and understanding that things change, but they don't have to go off the rails. We don't have to fear that change, and it can be managed. And so infrastructure is really important. And again, this is just something that's very close to my heart. Living in a city, living in a place where there's lots of space, living in places where we've got to increase density, but also wanting to maintain the character of our communities, and understanding the concern about Airbnbs and short-term rentals, and wanting to make sure that these really are about maintaining communities and families and affordability, not necessarily, you know, profiteering. So thank you all so very much, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Senator. I'm Dave Thaler. I'm the president of DS Thaler and Associates, and we're delighted to host everybody today. And Madam Chair, to the extent that this is a convenient location, you're welcome to use our facility anytime you wish. I'm a licensed professional engineer, licensed surveyor, licensed real estate broker, and I represent the Maryland Building Industry Association. And Senator, this is a most important topic to all of us, and I thank you very much for your legislation.
Agreed. Thank you for getting us here. I'm Deborah Bilo. I would be in costume, but I was too busy getting my 6-year-old ninja costume together. So that's way more important. I represent American Institute of Architects, the Maryland chapter, and I'm here on behalf of them. I also run my own architecture practice called Cedar. So I'm also here on behalf of that practice as well. Glad to talk.
Hi, I'm Chelsea Heyman. I'm from the Maryland Department of Disabilities. I'm the Director of Housing Policy and Programs of the department. Excited to talk a little bit about universal design and how to make these accessible for extremely low income people with disabilities as a housing resource.
So Yam's here, Lori. Anyone else? That's it. Just 2 missing. It's great. Okay, great attendance. Great. Well, once again, welcome everyone. And thank you, David, for agreeing to host. That was very kind of you, and for the great signage coming into your space. We really appreciate that, and working with our team at Maryland Planning, and love it. Welcome, Senator. We're so happy to have you, and my apologies to you for our oversight at the last meeting, but I think we've been able to get you up to speed and briefed, and fortunately the last one was recorded, so I know you're just going to jump right in. And also thank you for challenging us to this really great conversation, so thank you. And then I think we do have a few housekeeping administrative things we're going to go over. We're a little bit behind already, but we will make up that time and keep everything moving. I also want to just thank the staff and everyone here, and acknowledge the fact that we do have several members of the public online listening in and here in person. And we do have time reserved at the end for formal public comment with the folks in the room. It's really too challenging for us to try to do that externally. But as Joe, who will MC us, explain, we do have the chat function. We also have the public comment forum. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that portion of the agenda. So Joe, I think we'll go ahead, and I'm just going to overview the agenda real quick and then let you do the updates, if that's okay. So the first thing, I like to use timing because it helps give me a mark to be heading toward, to make sure we do stay on time and that we give adequate attention to each of the areas of this. So we will just do a couple administrative things after we've done this welcome. I also like to open meetings with sort of this opening round. So if you've got some thought that you want to share at the beginning of the meeting, and particularly toward the end, I usually like to allow time for a full closing summary and closing thoughts. So if there's things that you didn't really get to put out there during the meeting, please just make a note of it and ensure that I'll ensure we have time for you to provide any of those closing thoughts from what you heard and listened to today. So the other thing is we're going to spend just a couple of minutes recapping, but it's really everyone's responsibility to go back through the meeting notes. This is not a formal board. We are not approving minutes or anything of that sort, but we are going to be doing our best to keep the task force folder alive and active and a place for you to go back and review everything. So we'll do the quick recap, but we're going to keep it moving. We then will dive into, we have these blocks of time that we've allowed for. Really, this is a fact-finding mission and the ability to really learn from what's out there. So the staff has prepared resources, best practices to share with us. We'll have some time to ask questions and discuss that a bit. And then we're going to get into the fact that we cannot possibly do everything we need to do in the time frame we have and still come out with a product. So we will have to prioritize and focus. That's a little bit of what we'll start doing today. We have some things to kickstart that we'll kind of share with you. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the comments we have received. I read through all of them. I encourage everyone to be doing that. I think they're very insightful, and we'll keep doing that and providing them to everyone. And then the overall discussion around, well, how do we want to make sure we've, cast that net as best as we can, but knowing that it won't be exhaustive. We'll just do our best and get your input on how to do that. And we'll have a public comment period and then that closing round. So that's the game plan for the day. You've all had your agenda. So if you think of something, but you think, oh, it might belong at a better spot in the agenda, hold on to it until then, and we'll try to make sure there's time for everything. So that's the big overview. I'm going to pass it back to Joe now to walk us through a few of those updates. And then the staff will also kind of roll straight into that recap. So the mic's back over to you, Joe.
Thank you. I'm testing this other microphone. Okay. Good. Thank you. So we are recording this meeting. For those who are joining virtually, I believe that the meeting material link has been posted to the website, or I'm sorry, added to the chat, and it's posted on the website. These are the same materials that were transmitted to the task force themselves. There's also, I see people signing in the back. Appreciate those in the room to sign in so we know who's here. And if you give your email for members of the public, we'll make sure you stay informed. We have so many cords hooked up here that we ran out of USBs for a slide advancer. So I have my colleague, Susan LaRousse, who you also hear from later, who will be helping me advance the slides. So go ahead, Susan. I'm gonna quickly go through the rest, a couple slides here. I see these, these are the meeting objectives. Secretary Flora handled them well, so let's keep going. Just as a reminder about public comment, there will be some 15 minutes at the end, towards the end of today's meeting, but we do also have an online commenting form that's available to everybody. We'll be quickly summarizing that public comment later today in this meeting, but that is also one of the meeting materials that's been posted to the webpage and added to the chat is the complete list of public comments as of the 27th of October. Keep going. All right, so I do need to go through some administrative updates real quick. Okay, so you all probably saw some pretty confusing emails from me and others about financial disclosures and exemption requests. So the financial disclosure exemption request, which we discussed last time, our department submitted an exemption request to the state ethics commission. So right now that's on hold. If you already submitted yours, no problem. But if you haven't, also no problem. They have their next meeting on November 16th. So it's essentially on hold. We will find out on November 16th if that exemption request has been granted. And at that time, I will let you know. The one that's more confusing, and I don't have the answers for, is the appointee exemption disclosure form. This should, I don't know if all of you received it or just some of you received it. This wouldn't have come from me, and I didn't even know about it until one or two of the members said, "What is this, Joe?" So the appointee exemption disclosure form, I sent an email on October 13th to all of you that I recommend looking at. That I'm not gonna be able to answer the questions about this one. It says, I mean, the language is really confusing and legalistic. You really need to talk to the State Ethics Commission if you have questions about whether or not you need to submit one. So that form is, I'll read it to you, but it is confusing. That form is to request an exemption for any employment or financial interest that task force members hold at the time of appointment that are with or in entities that have some type of relationship with a particular board or the agency the board is under, including the Maryland Department of Planning. So I think only you and in a conversation with the Ethics Commission would know if you have that interest and whether or not you need to complete this. So I do encourage you to contact the State Ethics Commission. In that email on October 13th, I did note the contact information for them. Okay, also the OneDrive shared folder. I want to see if this is working for everybody. So when I sent the meeting materials yesterday, they were a subfolder in the larger folder that I'd already sent to you. Now, when I went to look at, those who it was shared with, I only saw state agency staff and one other task force member. Now, what I'm confused about is whether or not it's only once you accept that invite that it shows me who it's shared with. So did people have trouble accessing the folder that I sent yesterday? Yeah. Weird. Okay. Okay. All right. Good to know these complications. So I thought the OneDrive was going to work. It may have more complications than is worth it. So I was talking with our, actually, if we could please try to remember to use the microphones. I'm sorry.
And it worked for us. So.
Okay. Well, it's good to know. And in my situation, I work with developers some and not others because of security, accounts that you have through my organization. I was talking with some of our IT folks about this complication yesterday, and they recommended maybe trying Microsoft Teams. Now, I hate to throw a curveball and try one other thing, but I know Google Drive's not going to work. That's why there's no doubt it's not going to work. The state has not allowed those outside state government to use Google folders that the state establishes. Like go to try OneDrive. Now I might try Microsoft Teams. So please bear with me as I try to figure out that. We want to make sure we get through all the materials. And I know a lot of you who uploaded your resources that we discussed last time successfully uploaded the OneDrive share folder that I sent you in September. So I know this component of this pretty.
All I can say is welcome to our world, working in the state. We have about 3 different systems. Some work for some things and not all. And so we are trying to move everything into what should be paperless and shared folders, but it's really challenging. And we have an amazing new secretary of our Department of Information Technology who is really sorting through a lot of that at the state this year. So I'm hoping that all will get better for all of us moving forward. And thank you, Joe and the staff, for continuing to bear with us on this.
Thank you. Okay, unless anybody has any questions about these specific topics, and move on. You can always email me separately if you have. So, okay.
Joe, just to let you know, your mic seems to have quit.
This mic, you're not hearing this?
It's very, very light.
Okay, 1 second. Volume. How about now? Any better?
It's better.
I'll turn it up to the max. All right. We will work with what we have.
That sounds good.
Okay, good. Hopefully we have other batteries. If it's a matter of the batteries dying, I might have to pause and replace batteries. But right now, the light is still on it, indicating that it's working. Okay, let's go to the next slide. We're going to real briefly go through what we heard. As a reminder, meeting recordings and materials are available on the ADU Task Force webpage. That's an active link for those joining virtually. We're not doing meeting minutes in the traditional format, but we will be doing meeting notes to make sure that, and I sent those to you. Those are also on the meeting materials for those joining virtually, just to make sure we're all talking about the same thing, make sure we didn't miss anything. All right, so quickly go through what we heard. We heard that Maryland is expensive, and the data shows that residents are leaving, even those that work in Maryland, at least to live. We talked about NIMBYism, zoning, and homeowner association covenants, the fear of unintended consequences on the community, and a lack of political will act as barriers to the development of ADUs. We talked about how ADUs can support an aging population, provide affordable housing, reduce sprawl, and increase the supply of housing for disabled individuals. And that ADUs contribute to the issues of equity and inclusiveness if planned near transportation hubs. I have aging in place here again, but I already said that. All right. But there are unintended consequences of ADUs that we need to be aware of and discuss, including a negative impact on public services, such as parking availability and municipal services like picking up trash and the like. We talked about how it's not a silver bullet to the housing crisis that Maryland faces, but one tool among many. There was a discussion about the task force perhaps engaging legal counsel at some point in our deliberations. And a couple task force members said that they want the task force to do something about ADUs, not just to talk about them. All right, we'll continue looking at what the further discussion that we had on the 19th. We talked a lot about tracking ADU development. We talked about this related to the housing market analysis requirements. Some suggestions were to possibly track the number of ADUs based on the current tracking of wastewater treatment plant equivalent EDUs, equivalent dwelling units, local government annual reports as a place to look, and that SDAT and appraisal, and to talk about the appraisal impact of ADUs with the State Department of Assessment and Taxation. I'll get back to that later because we have contact then. We also talked about short-term rentals and that short-term rentals often become an unintended use of ADUs. And that's something we need to monitor. Short-term rentals are not mentioned in the bill, but they're often in best practice documents, state level legislation, and local ordinances. Right. So the bill does say we're supposed to be analyzing best practices, and therefore short-term rentals should be something that's considered. We talked about a concern of overregulation, and overregulation of ADUs may lead to workarounds or even illegal ADUs. There are many other requirements that can act as barriers, but also we are reminded of those jurisdictional services that ADUs will have an impact. And the task force just talks about compiling this inventory of those services. Can you go back? That's okay. I have a question because this one, we were looking at our notes. I wasn't very clear on this one, but so we talked about developing ADU scenarios. I think it was Jennifer. I'm not clear on this one, but it seemed like everybody else was, so it's probably my own thick-headedness. So can you remind us what we were talking about? Like what kind of scenarios? Development scenarios, site plan scenarios? What kind of scenarios were we talking about?
I'm sorry.
Right.
Should be working.
Great. So when I had mentioned that, ironically, I wrote that down on my agenda as well to bring up today of scenario planning. And a lot of times that really helps us identify the unintended consequences as well as walk through different policies that we should be addressing. And so the intention, as I had mentioned it previously, was to just build out a number of scenarios of what it could be and then walk through what do we need to look at in each of these. And it helps guide the conversation regarding policies, regarding concerns, and really address some of that. So instead of just trying to list everything out, we can build out, this scenario versus that scenario. And I'm happy to put those together for us to work through.
Thank you. Thanks for the clarity. And I will definitely be following up with you about that offer. All right. And then we also talked about sustainability and health. Forget, keep those in mind. When we're discussing ADU development, ADU policies, ADU best practices, for example, groundwater depletion was mentioned. So this is by no means captures every detail that was discussed, but I want to ask the task force if there's anything major that I didn't capture here, or in your review of the notes, which again, weren't meeting minutes, just notes, if there's anything significant that we missed. Okay, that sounds good. I want to thank Susan and my other colleagues for being the primary people to put together those notes. So thank you, Susan. All right, you can go on. Next, I'll go real quickly through just a reminder of for the next slide. We talked about definitions and focus areas. So the definition of accessory dwelling unit is in the bill itself. So this, remember, we're talking about attached or converted ADUs, as well as detached that are either created, they're either conversion of a detached unit or built as a detached unit. That the task force will be analyzing areas zoned for single-family uses, single-family residential uses, and that we're considering ADUs as a rental housing product, and that the task force will not be restricting itself to a discussion only of ADU best practices on owner-occupied property. Because we talked about that in both local ordinances and other state legislation, they're not often not limited to just owner-occupied property. All right, keep going. All right, so our staff started reviewing some resources and best practices, or start reviewing some best practice resources. We've been compiling for a while. But then also, as mentioned, I know I emailed those who offered up some resources. There'll be a slide here later on where I ask you to talk about it. So I want to say that this first batch is from a 2023 resource. Priscilla is probably familiar with this. It was a resource developed as a partnership between AARP and APA, which I thought was a very well-written and clear document. I'm happy to share it with anybody. It's right there. Thank you. Expanding ADU development and occupancy. And it provides some good examples of considerations that local governments or anybody interested in ADU need to consider. And this is, if you think ADUs might be right for your community, make sure you have these considerations before you delve into it. And they're political, regulatory, procedural, and financial. So we'll go.
So Joe, we have about 45 minutes for this section.
Okay.
So I want to ensure that we're not being talked at, that there's opportunity along the way for adding to or discussing or asking questions. And so my job will help to facilitate and manage that so that we do get through all the slides, but I don't want you all to feel like we have to sit here and just get a lecture on ADUs. And so I just want to kind of state that up front as sort of how we manage the meeting. And we'll look for those virtually also. I don't want to go into a deep dive on each of these, but if there's things that you think you can add or clarifying questions, let's try to do that along the way. Joe, you're going to have to move around with the mic for us to be able to do that. So if people have a thought or a question, either raise your hand, or I've always found this is really, not with these because they're not stiff enough. That sometimes works. Just so, but it's a small enough group. I think I can sort of see where people want to jump in, and we'll just watch your time. We need to end this portion at about 10:15. And that will just kind of go from there. Does that work for you?
Absolutely. And I will ask those members of the task force that are joining virtually to please raise their hand. And Susan, you can see that, correct? Susan can see that, and then we can have them
so we'll just try to
unmute
manage
and
that
share
as best as we can. So
all right, so we will quickly go through these, but I'll stop it at the end of each one if anybody would like to share.
Right, and since we do have a AARP person here.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Anything to add would
So
be
if you want to go to the next slide, Susan. Oh, I'm sorry, did you want to add anything before we begin? You're familiar with the document, I'm sure. Oh, there is, and I'm barely going to touch on them. I encourage people to read it, but it's a well done document. It's very accessible, but also hits all the points. It's really well organized, but it's not extremely dense. It's not like a 500-page document.
No, and it's not getting into a lot of technical stuff.
That's why I thought it'd be a great one to begin this discussion of best practices. We're going to be talking about best practices throughout the task force time meeting, but I think this gives a good overview. So, all right. You need to activate, yeah, you need to click on the screen. No. Turn that off. And then there you go. Okay, any jurisdiction considering ADUs must account for the political issues first, right? So understanding, you need to establish that understanding with staff, with officials, with stakeholders about what ADUs are, right? What are we all talking about? All right, so that must be something that you do first. This discussion needs to be inclusive. Engagement and planning for ADU policy, legislation, and regulation must ensure that the entire community is represented. Right? And I think this task force, I think, is a reflection of that, the membership of this task force. But we'll also talk later about when we get into our research methods, including other members of the public in not just the public commenting forum, but other methods of research. And then there's, don't forget about local. No, I like how you have it going there. Local planning and zoning control. All right, we talked about that last time in Maryland, or how that works in Maryland. The local control may conflict with state or regional interests in more housing or ADUs, or they just might not be aligned. Conflict might be too strong. Jurisdictions may be tentative about venturing into ADU ordinance development if their neighbors aren't doing it, if it's not common in the region, right? So they need to, how much risk are they willing to take on? And then I have some links here. I'm not going to go into detail for each one, some examples of how different jurisdictions have addressed this issue.
I was just going to mention, as you talk about the planning and the zoning and the policy, one of the things to keep in mind as well is there still are things on the books in several jurisdictions, even in Maryland and throughout, that have a consideration of how many people related and non-related can live on a property. And that is something for us to make sure we don't lose sight of as well.
Jennifer, I think it's a really good point, because there's aspects of zoning that have sort of this indirect connectivity that's a really good point to raise, I think, generally. Any other questions or thoughts on political considerations before we move into regulatory considerations? Yes, Senator.
Thank you. I think it's a good transition. That as the state, I'd say we, the royal we, are very cautious about and respective of zoning. That authority does come from the state. So in thinking about this, we could think about what's the framework, and maybe what are the standards. So one of the things to protect different markets would be to have all standards apply, and recommended standards. And so it probably will ultimately be still the authority of the local jurisdictions, but being able to provide, if one is going to do X, that this is how it needs to be done in Maryland. So that, to me, would be the way we could think about it. And certainly the Department of Planning, in its requirement of local jurisdictions to do 10-year plans. I think that that's also something to be added when we're looking at this, transitioning to this local planning and zoning control, is that every jurisdiction is required to provide the planning department with a 10-year plan. And so perhaps requesting that ADUs or whatever, that it is at least referenced in that plan. That, if that makes sense, Jennifer.
Yeah, and I think that's just part of our research right now, is to kind of figure that out. I'll use your mic, Joe. Yeah.
I was just gonna comment, again, I had served on Carroll County Planning and Zoning for a long time before I was an elected official. And obviously, as a local elected official, I feel very strongly about local control. But from my Planning and Zoning Commission experience, I've often seen politics and NIMBYism get in the way of what is good public policy. And so it is a really complex, I would say this is a really complex issue, because, different, municipalities, different counties have different needs, and a one size doesn't fit all approach. And that's why local control is important. But at the same time, you do have the tension, the very real tension of politics and NIMBYism getting in the way of what actually makes sense for the long run or for the greater good. So, you know, it's very important that I think we, as we navigate these waters, to really think hard on that, about how to strike that balance between those different issues. So.
Great, thank you, Councilman. One more comment and then we'll move on to regulatory.
You know, I live in Anne Arundel County, and I mentioned last time that both the city of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County have put in ADUs. But one of the challenges that I think we need to think about with zoning is when land is really close to water, because that has that whole other zoning element to it, you know, that you can't have as many impervious surfaces when you're close to water, and you can't have as many people populating an area when you're close to water. So Maryland is very unique because we have so much water, you know, coastal areas as well as the non-coastal, and it's very, very, very different the way things need to be treated between the two areas.
Okay, thank you, Priscilla. So my job of keeping us moving, we'll go to regulatory next.
Okay. So there are also regulatory considerations. First, it's just locating ADUs, considering the proper locations. What are the appropriate districts, right? Is this all single family zones, some single family zones? Does the number of permitted ADUs differ by zone? Also discretionary approvals. We talked a little bit about that last time. Does this vary by district, by right versus special exception? These are all things you need to consider. Is everything by right? Or is it a certain number by right, but also then varying by district? So kind of locating discretionary go together. And then finally, zoning standards. How do we apply zoning standards? Are they the same as the underlying single family zoning district? Or do they differ based on if you want to construct an ADU? What about controversial issues such as design, property tenure, and parking? Right, these are all things we're going to be talking about more, but these zoning standards must be addressed as part of your local deliberation.
Great, thanks, Joe. And so we sort of are kind of a like group of people who I think all know about special exceptions and conditional use, but please speak up if we start using jargon as planners around certain things in terms of, like, for instance, these discretionary approvals, whereas, you know, as right is that no need to go to the zoning board, no need to go to planning commission. It's just allowed. You can get your building permit and go for it, versus these special exceptions, which happens a lot with the ADU and the zoning code. But any thoughts, questions, comments related to these regulatory considerations, which can get very complex? Okay, Jennifer.
I'm just going to keep adding in each time.
Please.
The one that continuously, and it fits within all of these, but it's the trip generation as well, because that is what impacts the infrastructure. So as we talk about parking for ADUs, obviously it means we're thinking about additional trips at each house, which means it's an impact on intersections, on roadways, the amount of volume, potential congestion, everything else that goes with that as the domino effect. So I want to make sure anytime we talk about parking, we also need to be talking about the impact for trip generation and what that means on our roadways.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. Another comment from the councilman? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, James.
So one thing I wanted to make sure that we keep in mind, I can't speak for the Anne Arundels in Charles counties, but for the inner smaller towns, our biggest issue is land use as well as services provided. So as you expand and add more people to your population, if you will, we then have to, and I'm a town administrator, I have to look at such things as increase in trash. Parking is a major issue. Those types of issues, that's something the inner county need to be concerned about, because a lot of, Mount Rainier, North Brentwood, City of Hyattsville, we're limited on land, we're limited on services. And so for you to say, hey, affordable housing, let's put an ADU in, but that will increase our tax base and also increase our trash and services that the town needs, because we basically increase the amount of population that really wasn't designed for that. So you must be cognizant of that, especially for our inner towns. Inner towns and city. I can't speak about for the larger communities, but for our inner
communities, it is very important for us.
Great.
Thank you for that, James.
However,
Uh-oh, uh-oh.
no, I just want to say that when I look at it from the AARP perspective, and we're talking about people aging in place, often you have a house that had 6 people in it, or 8 people in it, or whatever, and now you're down to 1 person, and you're talking about an ADU to add a caretaker, or to bring in, one of the adult children. So you've gone from a family of 6 with trash and parking and all that other stuff down to 2.
Okay.
So you can't just assume that adding an ADU is going to add cars and add people and add usage to the facilities and the roads and everything else. You have to generalize it over everything.
Okay, I think we have, the councilman, was in the queue already. And then we'll go to Mandy, and then we're going to move to the next topic. Thank you all.
So, one of the overarching issues is the fact that we need more affordable housing in the state of Maryland. And the reality is, when we're looking at these issues, regulatory considerations are super important because they drive up costs. And another thing, I think that sometimes, no offense to government officials, I am one now, but having been in the development world myself at one point in time, I think sometimes something that people fail to forget in the bureaucratic world is that time equates to money. So as we make things more cumbersome, whether we're talking about, by right or special exception, or more layers on top of that, all of that also drives up costs. And again, this is just like the last thing we talked about, political considerations. There are inherent tensions here, but I think we're going to have to think long and hard of what we're trying to accomplish and what the priorities are, and, make recommendations with that in mind.
Great. Thank you. One more comment on the regulatory.
I think this kind of is important to discuss. When I get a project, the first thing I do is look to see who is the AHJ, the authority having jurisdiction, whether it is the county, the city, the township. Every jurisdiction usually has adopted international building code with local amendments, meaning that the jurisdiction has say over what is required. The city of Annapolis is different from Montgomery County, different from Frederick County or Howard County. These jurisdictions do have the power and the right to help guide what is needed for their location. If that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. And I just, we'll go to procedural next, but I also want to remind everyone that right now, yes, we're just trying to get all the information out there, all the values, because I'm committed to we're not into a decision-making mode. We're trying to just get everything out there. So this is all great. Make sure we balance the sides of the table here also. But I think ultimately we're going to have to take all of this and gather it together into something that either becomes this guidance, framework, recommendations, outcomes. We're not voting on any. We're putting a report together. And so, understanding that purpose and understanding how we do that in a way with all of these amazing perspectives around the table, I think is going to be, really interesting, because I think we're all learning. So it's really great. Joe, procedural.
Okay. So once you figured out the political aspect, not that you ever figured these things out completely, but the political and regulatory, there's, you have that all in place. There's still how are ADs actually going to happen, right? So you need to consider applicant education and technical assistance. How are you going to help property owners or others who are interested in developing ADUs actually get them done? How are you going to clear up uncertain processes? Jurisdictions should consider establishing clear time limits for ADU reviews, dedicating staff resources, and perhaps partnering with community-based organizations or others to help them with this. And then what do you do with unpermitted ADUs, right? I think we discussed last time, a lot of us know that, ADUs aren't anything new. They've been going back centuries. right? But there's a lot of unpermitted ones out there. And often the unpermitted ones can reflect poorly on ADUs in general, right? That's, people can think of the unpermitted ones that just popped up and they think that all ADUs are going to be like that, right? So how do you address those? You may want to consider amnesty programs. I think that's one that I have listed up here from Colorado, offering funding to help bring illegal ADUs up to code. I know we talked about code a few times here, and or creating a rental licensing program if that one doesn't already exist.
Right. Any added thoughts around procedural categories or topics that we will need to get into?
I'll just say one quick thing that right now, not all, I'm just thinking of this in terms of the different types of buildings we've talked about, the 800 square foot versus the 200 square foot. Not all ADUs can be permitted. If we're doing a 200 square foot building, where does that fall?
Q.
Like the tiny house is not a permittable structure currently because it doesn't, it can't adhere to current building code. In 2020, the 2021 building code, which is now pretty widely being adopted, but it hasn't been adopted. Most are still on the 2018 building code. And 2018 building code won't allow for the size of spaces that are made in such a small structure. No, they can't be. By building code, they can't be legal. If we're adhering to building code.
They're basically not acknowledged or even
They're not
reflected in the
acknowledged, right.
building
Well,
code.
I guess and that's why they are so typically built on wheels, because then they're considered mobile structures and not buildings.
But that's all changing around the country also. And the tiny home market is alive and well and moving, as is the building codes to keep up with it. Yeah.
Move on to financial. Okay, last set of these considerations. So the last one's a financial. So jurisdictions are really wanting ADUs. They need to grapple with the financial implications to property owners, right? Particularly if one of the purposes of ADUs, as we've discussed, is supporting aging in place or building household wealth. So there are a number of different costs to be considered. You have planning and design costs. Jurisdictions could develop grants, other financial incentives. There's also pre-approved building plans. You'll see at a lot of different jurisdictions that people that'll make that planning and design costs bring it way down. Construction costs, these are typically the highest. That jurisdictions can create a local loan program, partner with home builders, or partner with financial institutions. And then finally, development fees. Three alternative approaches for reducing these fees and charges are reducing the waiving development impact fees. You know, we saw that in some of the state legislation, you'll see that in some of the state legislation and local legislation, reducing or waiving land use or building permitting fees, or reducing waiving utility connection charge. This could incentivize ADU construction, but you have to keep in mind that this could hurt a jurisdiction's bottom line for waiving all these fees for ADUs, right? So there has to be a balance, right? I know it's been mentioned multiple times. Don't forget about the municipal services.
So financial, anything else that we need to consider in our list? Go ahead.
There you go.
That's it. Part of that, have you discussed assessment? Like what will SDAT say about the value of this property? Is it part of the overall assessment? Is it assessed as a separate entity that also gets into revenue generation for locals? So that, I don't know if that was added or discussed or.
I'll mention, it was mentioned last time about SDAT, and I'll go ahead and say it now. So like we have contacted SDAT and they're looking into it. I don't have an answer to that.
But that is a financial consideration. Yes. And I think to add that, because certainly development fees and how they might counter them and the need for those. Yeah, it's just something people should take into consideration and be aware of, because it may increase their property taxes, which could be good or bad depending on the taxpayer.
So I think the clarifier there is maybe how we present, because this is all going to ultimately lead into how we present this too, is financial consideration. Just get to the point where you build. So I think it's the intent of this. And so there's obviously going to be the operation side. So maybe this is the financial considerations of the, planning, design, construction versus future operation costs, which kind of go outside of our realm in some degree, but it's still something to be factored in. So,
If I could add that all financial considerations. So could there be a consideration of revenue? I mean, there's costs, there's revenue, there are infrastructure costs. So maybe there's costs can be divided among what's a municipality or a jurisdiction costs versus the landowner costs, but that is part of the calculation. And perhaps, so,
good. No, that's all good thoughts.
have to see that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's the broader issue, right? Why don't you, it's like, I got to still control the meeting here.
So I was just gonna make a comment, like if you were putting an ADU and you're in a municipality, some of the issues are gonna be, whether you have a separate water sewer hookup or whether it goes directly to the primary dwelling. And obviously, if it goes directly to the primary dwelling, that might be fine, especially if you have a 1-bedroom, you're not adding on a huge amount of capacity. And that would probably be more cost effective. And I would think most municipalities would look on that differently than if you're having to put in a separate, a whole new thing for water or sewer. But then the other issue that comes into play is, like for the city of Westminster, we have a lot of issues related to making sure we have enough water capacity that involve MDE and what happened during the drought in 2003. So, if we were doing an ADU, we would have to think about water allocation and making sure we had, in theory, enough water because we're adding a separate dwelling unit at the heart. So those are just some of the issues that, depending on how you design or what your recommendations are, could really, again, drive up costs. Personally, I feel like ADUs should be subservient to the primary dwelling, because the one thing I would not want to see personally is a bunch of little ADUs being divided up from the primary dwelling 10, 20 years down the road. I just don't think that's a great idea for a variety of reasons. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole with that. But I think ADUs should be subservient to the primary dwelling. I don't think we should set up something where it can be subdivided off, 10, 20 years down the road, because I think that's a concern that would concern a lot of jurisdictions, whether they're municipalities or otherwise.
Great. Good thoughts. I'm going to keep us moving because I'm doing a time check here.
I just have to ask a question just about sort of finalizing on financial considerations. I would suggest that we do need to have as a part of our contemplation or getting data on, and what are all the costs and what are all the revenues. And so there, as I said, there's planning and design and construction and development fees, but there are infrastructure costs and considerations. So do we think of that as part of this section? Or do we create another section?
Well, this is an unfunded initiative, so we don't, our task force. So there's a limit as to how deep we can dive on doing assessments and fees. But to your point, that's going to be part of the prioritization of sort of figuring out what topics are sort of the highest regarded topics that we're going to need to dive into in more detail, and where do and how do we do that. So right now we're sort of just trying to get everything out on the table.
Right. So what I would strongly put on the table is, if we're going to have a real discussion about what does this look like, it impacts the consideration of the revenue generation of these two municipalities and two jurisdictions would have to be part in play. And then also I agree with the councilman in that we have to start, I think, recommending that we just talk about this as housing. And that how we talk about these as ADUs, it's housing, and it is attached as part of a housing unit. So there was a time when we had big houses, and then the houses got divided into apartments, and now they're all going back into big houses, or, so there's that flow. But I think that we can have a conversation as a work group about our conceptualization of this new type of this, this old type of housing, and how it fits into our general frame.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah. And I think we'll talk about that more as we talk about process, because there might be the need to form working groups, around some of the priority topics that come out of this. And, but we have it, we're captured it, we hear you, and I'm going to move us on. Thank you. Livability.
Now the third microphone. Hopefully this works. Amy Mordock, have a hand raised. This might be working.
Joe, your mic is not that good, and I think you called for Amy Mordock.
I heard you, Joe. I was
okay.
waiting. So a lot of great comments about some of the aspects of the development of accessory dwelling units that we can't necessarily wiggle around, and those are adequate public facilities, meeting building code, and what rental provisions mean as an accessory dwelling unit. So I'm not going to add on to that conversation, but I look forward to discussing those aspects further. But what I haven't heard mentioned, and I just want to put this on the table, is the consideration of allowances that we may try to make and incentives that we may consider for an accessory dwelling unit, and the perceived equity of some of those incentives and allowances within the development community. And I liken this conversation to that of the onslaught of food trucks. There have been a lot of food trucks that are not acting like food trucks in our rural communities. And I don't know if this is also typical in more urban areas, but there are families that have been caterers, and they have made food truck purchases, and they'll set up camp somewhere and operate basically as a takeout business. And the county was asked to review that operation favorably and to support a small business owner, which we want to do. However, there was a lot of backlash in how we were trying to draft that legislation to accommodate this use, to allow for the flexibility. It was the brick and mortar established restaurants that gave us a bit of a backlash to say, hey, now that's not fair. We had to pay all of these expenses to permit our businesses and to keep our businesses viable. And now the playing field is no longer level. So I just bring up that comparison just to keep it in mind when we are looking at ways to cut costs and incentivize this land use.
Thank you, Amy. That's a great comparative. I think there's probably others as we're sort of nodding our heads here in the room. I'm doing a time check. It's 10 o'clock after 10. And I know that Joe and the team has several, a little after 10, actually 10:06 to be exact, a few more slides to get through. So once again, we're just trying to get everything out on the table right now. And then we're going to have to do some deeper dives in some of these topics, particularly the ones that are priorities. So let's move through the next. I've got the slides in front of me. Let's move through the livability issues.
So the next one, and some of the things that have been discussed are actually going to be addressed in these later slides. So this is my colleague, David Dahlstrom, who's joining us virtually from the Upper Eastern Shore. He did this research and put together these slides. So David, if you could unmute, and if you could turn on your camera, I'm hoping we could see you.
Yeah. All right. Good morning. Happy Halloween. I'm representing the Colonel. And I have a bucket of information for you. I'm not going to
David,
my original recipe.
I'm guessing you're dressed up like Colonel Sanders, but we don't see you. Is your camera on? I would really like to see you dressed up like Colonel Sanders, but
We have the
Can't see me.
He was on.
Sorry about that.
okay, it may hold on. It might be just with what we're
All right,
showing
hang
here.
on. How about now?
I think it's just the.
There you are. There we go. We see you.
Hey,
All right.
love it.
The Riddler likes your costume.
All right, got my bucket of chicken here. All right.
Okay. Did you hear? You got.
Go
second
ahead,
place
David. Go
on it,
ahead,
too.
David.
Distracting. All right.
Go
All right.
ahead, Dave.
But, well, good morning. Um, we were asked to look at
The Colonel.
neighborhood livability.
David, I think it's best for you to take
Issues
your
of best
video
practice.
off so that you can just, they can't hear you.
This for ADUs, and we did literature look at law.
David, we're having trouble hearing you. If you could turn your video off. Like Chuck
Local
was
zoning
saying.
regulations. So, there's articles out there that really happens when ADUs are built. And so, off. I can't hear you.
David, if your camera's still on, I
Hello?
can't tell right now. Make sure you
Yeah.
turn your camera off because there's some connectivity issues here.
Okay. All right. It's
Okay. I know we've had some connectivity issues in our Upper Eastern Shore office in Centerville. So here's a good example. I know
Join me
David's been
on the
having
Eastern
been
Shore.
having a lot of these recently. David, give
I
it.
think you should just move us through
All
these
right.
slides because we're running behind and we've got to keep this
All right.
moving.
Okay.
So, Joe, you can
well,
take this.
Yeah, so David
Or I
did a
can.
lot of good work and a lot of good notes on this. I don't have all the detail that he does, but one of the things that the legislation said that we needed to look at was neighborhood livability issues, and then a number have been discussed already. So here's just a quote, from somebody who obviously is not in favor of ADUs, which some of you might be familiar with similar sentiments. But here on the right, some things that can inform neighborhood livability issues in our discussion. And I can make sure that David follows up with us with some more information. Can you move forward,
And-
Susan?
And Joe, I can add to that too.
Okay.
This is sort of my topic. Back to the other one. One of the comments we heard, and I appreciate it, in reading through the comments is, what about neighborhood context? What about neighborhood design? What about scales of neighborhood? How is that changing the overall look, feel, approach? And I think that those are real. Those are real concerns, and those are things related to density, people coming in and out of your community that you don't know anymore because you're used to having knowledge of who's in your community. I think we have to respect and acknowledge people's concerns, even though there's probably a lot of different examples. And so how does that impact, if someone, we've talked about it from an infrastructure standpoint of parking and traffic, percentage of renters. I always see renters as sort of an entry toward home ownership. But all of these things do relate to these very valued concerns that are out there, about how is this changing the livability that I have experienced in my neighborhood or I have bought into my neighborhood. Joe, next one, and then we'll.
Can I just make one comment?
Yeah. Yes.
So, Joe, the line, so. While those concerns are valid, like for me personally, I live off of an old historic neighborhood with about 20 houses. I think the intensity of the number of ADUs has a huge impact here.
Absolutely.
I would totally argue, like in our neighborhood, if there was, 3 or 4 ADUs spread out throughout the neighborhood, realistically, I know people would disagree with me that might be watching online. The world is not ending, with that impact. Now, if everybody in that neighborhood had an ADU in their backyard, yes, I think that would. So I think we need to, when we're thinking about this, we do need to think about the intensity of how many there are. And that's where you get in conversations also about by right or conditional or special exception, because these are valid concerns depending upon the number and the intensity within a certain community.
Great, thank you.
So-
So other livability issues, can you go to the next slide, Susan? Yeah. And so I think, there's been a lot out there in terms of sort of both sides of this, and these are some of the ones that do relate to all of the pros and cons, but they all relate to how we feel about the communities we live in. And, the ability to someone maybe hang on to their home because they have the ability to, have someone there to either help maintain it, or to have some rental income. So there's this whole bucket that I think what we really want to acknowledge is this is one of the things we're going to have to weigh. It's one of the things that is more qualitative, albeit, there could be regulatory density, just like having 20 bars in a 4-block area has an impact different from the corner one that everybody goes to. So it's all depends, right? But these are very real, in some cases, more qualitative things that we have to look at. I think for this group, know that you're going to have more resources and more data coming at you. You are going to be experts after this on this topic from all shapes and sizes and lenses. And, there's going to be a lot of required reading homework. I used to be a professor, for us to be able to do our job well, I think, and make sure that we've at least looked at all of these things that the staff's putting together. So thank you, David, for your research. We'll get back to you, I'm sure, as we start digging deeper into some of these topics.
Sure, thank you.
Thanks, David. We're really going to be running out of time. Do you?
Just one
pressing?
very quick.
We'll hold it.
Okay, thank you. I just want us to also keep in mind some of the equity issues that tie into neighborhood character and lesser extent neighborhood livability. I mean, there is some history here in terms of the role of exclusionary zoning and how it was used in the 40s and 50s, particularly when we talk about concerns around renters and some of kind of the underlying issues there. Not to paint a broad brush on anyone that speaks of neighborhood livability or neighborhood character, but just want to make sure that we're cognizant of some of the historical implications of those terms.
Thanks so much. And to share how much I care about that, I once applied the Simpson Diversity Index to the writing of the Lead for Neighborhood Development to ensure diversity on all levels and types. And so that is a topic I also care very much about. So we're gonna dive in. No, I know you don't, but I just want to make sure the public knows that we are going to really look across all of this. So let's go to the next one on best practices, because I want to make sure we at least get through the information.
David. So what I'm going to say, and we're going to go to hear Susan in a second.
Okay.
I'm going to have David, who created a lot of excellent notes. We can send it to you.
Yes.
So you all can see what he's found. And I want to say that David wanted to be here today, but I told him not to be because he has a housing analysis to do for a comprehensive plan that I asked him to focus on that. And he's coming from Centerville. So and we're going to be talking about housing affordability here and the requirements of comprehensive plans. Susan's going to be talking about that. So, the work doesn't stop. And even when we're not talking about ADUs, the department's still doing a lot of work on housing affordability. So I appreciate David's work, and I'm sorry that the connectivity fell through, and I do appreciate his costume. So now we're going to turn it over to Susan, who's in the room.
Thank you, Joe. I'm Susan LaRousse, Maryland Department. I think there's a couple of things that I heard us talking about regarding cost and affordability. And I kind of put it into two categories. One relates to the cost of constructing an ADU to the homeowner. How much does it cost? And is it affordable to develop a ADU in the sense of the return on investment for that homeowner? Or could it just cause a foreclosure type of situation, an unaffordable investment? The second is, what is the cost to the renter of an ADU? And is this product type an quote affordable dwelling unit in the marketplace? So those two questions I think we will dig into in our task force meetings and report upon in our final report. But let's begin with defining affordable housing and what it means as defined in Maryland statute. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. Slide 20 tells us that HB 1045 required a housing element in a comprehensive plan the 10-year planning document that's required by all jurisdictions with planning and zoning authority. And that came into effect in 2019. And that bill also required each comprehensive plan to identify definitions of a low income and workforce housing in accordance with the statute. It also required a needs analysis for each of those jurisdictions that have planning and zoning authority to define the need for low income and workforce housing. So the slide in front of you now is an example of the tool the Maryland Department of Planning developed in the housing element models and guidelines document that is online that all of you can go into and play around with if you like, by identifying a jurisdiction either by the county or by a municipal level. And in that this particular slide as an example, we pulled up Prince George's County for an example of how you can read this tool. And it's telling us that the average median income is $152,100 for a family of 4. And then it goes on to say basically that what is the definition of workforce housing, both from ownership and from a rental. So with considering that most ADUs will probably be rental, we can see the range of that household income and what that means, and the same for low income housing. And then it goes on to say that affordable housing is determined to be based on 30% of the household income. And in regard to affordability, it tells us that workforce rental range and the low income, which is under 60% of the AMI, it identifies those areas and the amount of money that that household can afford to spend on housing. The last slide, next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, a couple more slides. So this slide is basically telling us that the cost associated with new detached ADUs will be probably the most expensive, as well as attached new construction will also probably be the most expensive, whereas the cost of a home conversion or another structure on the property being converted is questionable. We don't know, we don't have the costs associated with that. Next slide. But what we did determine through much of the literature that we're reading and just understanding construction to a certain extent, we're not experts in the planning department on home construction. We do know that ADUs may be affordable for homeowners to build because there's no land cost. That's a very big aspect of developing homes. The second is there's generally no excavation. It's unlikely that people will build a basement with an ADU. In fact, they'll probably build it on slab. There's reduced infrastructure, likely at least in urban areas, the infrastructure will already exist. And the fact that ADUs generally range in size from approximately 600 to 1,200 square feet. And often the regulations that we have noticed thus far put restrictions on the actual dwelling unit being somewhere around 50% the size of the primary dwelling unit on the property. We believe the average cost of construction only, not including land, permit fees, excavations, or other costs, cost approximately $150 per square foot. And we're willing to take others' opinions on that type of thing as well. So next slide. And then finally, we wanted to bring to your attention that the Federal Housing Authority, FHA administration, did a press release on October 16th regarding the changes that are coming across in regard to financing. And I know there's a lot of text on that slide, but I did that purposefully so that you could read it. It's a little bit complicated, but basically it's saying that 75% of the estimated ADU rental income for some borrowers will qualify for the FHA insured mortgage on property with an ADU. So that is, if you understand basically rental aspects and claiming income and that type of thing, that is a big change. I think this is trying to encourage and bring forth more ADUs into the marketplace. There are other aspects to that. I recommend that you read them carefully. We don't need to go into that discussion so much today, but I think it's valuable information we wanted to bring forth to you all. Thank you.
Great, Susan. Thank you so much. So I think that gives us a little bit of a lens into some of this, cost, revenue, financing from a property owner's standpoint. Any clarifying questions for Susan around some of this information?
I have one.
Yes.
I didn't see anything addressing parking. Is that something that the committee or your research did, i.e. 2 parking spaces per ADU, 1? How did that work, or was that even discussed? No, the mere fact that
I believe that we will be doing some thorough research in regard to that, in regard to requirements, reporting back to you what other jurisdictions are doing in regard to that. And in regard to affordability and cost, sometimes if these ADUs are located in an area where there is access to transit, buses, rail line, that type of thing, it may be that these jurisdictions are actually waiving parking requirements. The construction for the ADU would be unlikely to have garages, but likely to have a driveway parking space on site if there's room on the lot, because a lot of lots are too small for that too.
Correct. So in my previous jurisdiction where I was town administrator, the one thing that they countered with the ADU concept is if you have an ADU on your property, you must allow for 2 parking spaces on the lot, not on the street, but on the lot.
Wow.
And if you could not have the space to do that, then your ADU was considered null and void, if you will. So, and that was one way to address. I mean, these are smaller communities and they're limited on parking. So,
Yeah.
That's something you definitely need to consider.
Great. Thank you. One more question.
I think it's a comment too. These prohibitions on density, right, have their, as was alluded to, have their history in sort of prohibiting low income white ethnics and Black folks from coming into properties. So I think when we look at that, it might be interesting to look at what are all the ways in which our jurisdictions in Maryland have set up historically these prohibitions around density, and sort of look at how do we sort of adjust and address those. It does seem as though thinking about carriage houses and coach houses, and that's one scenario, but there have been specific prohibitions against apartments. And then one more to the issue or to the observation about that ADUs might be perceived as being provided with a benefit vis-a-vis traditional housing that has been going on since 1917, 1920s and 26, where single family, low density has been prioritized. And so I think we're just sort of maybe part of our task now is to sort of roll some of this back. And yeah, that's just I just wanted to make a clear, specific point about that ADUs, prohibitions against ADUs have a very specific history in exclusionary zoning, zoning out ethnic whites that had high family, had intergenerational families, Italians, Irish, etc., and African Americans that were emigrating from the South. So being the state of Maryland, I think we have to all be out about that and understand that. And so as we're having this conversation, so there's a cost analysis, but there's also a historic and policy undoing that I think that we're doing here, that we have a responsibility to be mindful of. And maybe we could get a little briefing, you know, on that. We've got good people at our universities that give us that history so that we can just all be out of that and have it not be sort of in the back of our minds.
Great.
Thank you, Senator. Senator, I think you have really touched on the elephant in the room, to tell you the truth. Euclidean zoning, which is the zoning that about 85% of the country that has zoning was always designed to be discriminatory. The first case was Wick U, came before the Supreme Court in 1888 and was designed to keep Chinese laundries from expanding in California. The second case was the New York City zoning of 1916, which was designed to keep the so-called sweatshops moving up Fifth Avenue, which were mainly Jewish and Italian. And the seminal case of Euclid v. Ambler Realty in 1922 was to keep immigrants from moving west out of Cleveland on Euclid Avenue and taking up the big mansions on Euclid Avenue. And so it is a rare, I think the councilman has alluded to this today and at the last meeting, but it's a rare community that's going to support more density. And so that we have all these regulations to keep the other people, whatever they are, of every ethnicity out. And so I think this is the delicate subject that I think we really haven't talked about. But I think when we're all done, I think we need to recommend to the legislature that they adopt regulations mandating increased housing opportunity, because I don't think the locals can do it. There's too much not in my backyard. We don't want those kind of people here. And I think it has to come from the state level.
Well stated. Thank you. And I see an action item there, I think, for us is to, I think, add to our slide decks sort of that historical understanding of how zoning has really evolved, shall we say, in terms of this whole notion that I know is looked to a lot in undoing the wrongs of the past in terms of how we use zoning. So not that we all need a master's lecture on any of that, but I think it is an important piece of information of how did we get here and how did we get to where we're at, but we do need to.
I know, but just a final thing. As a committee, it will also help us be able to, I think, better discern what is thought to be true and what is actually true.
Yes.
So, you know, for example, density decreases property values. Well, I really would like to see that evidence. So there's a lot of sort of these things that go into our calculations that are actually a part of, you know, misinformation or differing interpretation of data to achieve a political, you know, end versus policy and housing.
Thank you. One last comment, Councilman.
So,
Mike.
yeah. So I think there's a lot of truth to those comments about, you know, the history. But I do think it's also important that we do remember there is, like, just with the example I gave, if everyone in my neighborhood did ADU, that is going to have a real impact on infrastructure. I think what often happens is some people use that argument to stop anything, if you understand what I mean, because I would argue, listen, like, I mean, yes, if I'm in an area where parking just doesn't exist, but if I'm in an area where I have 20 houses and there's 3 or 4 ADUs in that neighborhood, parking is not suddenly, you know, maybe in certain locations, but parking is suddenly not going to be the end of the world. Okay. It's just not enough intensity. And all of that. So, but I think that what often happens is people use those kind of arguments to exclude or historically exclude. I agree with that. But we also have to keep in mind that there is some valid concerns regarding, how much intensity you add to a neighborhood. So again, this is a prime example, and I keep on hitting on it. There are inherent truths and tensions here that we're going to have to think about and consider as we make recommendations. And I understand where you're coming from, but as a local elected official, I will say this. I don't necessarily always like when the state comes in and tells, the city of Westminster what is best for the city of Westminster. Because I would argue that as a local elected official, I maybe understand my community better than somebody who has no connection to my community whatsoever. Now, I'm known as being, brave when it comes to housing issues. I am very supportive of housing, and there are a lot of political issues around that. But I think we have to be careful how we navigate some of that, because not all of, local control is all about some kind of, old historic latent racism either. So again, there's some tension and balance here.
Great, thank you. We are going to move on. Thank you. I think the thing that I really want to ensure this group does is stick to the facts, use the data, focus on what we know. And in that process, if we, learn more, debunk myths, sort of at least provide more for locals to go on, that'll be a positive outcome. So Joe, please take us through the rest of this segment, because we do need to move into the next segment.
So these are the resources the task force members mentioned last meeting and provided. These are links actually to the OneDrive. I can put them on the website, but these are links to the OneDrive folder. So I know we're running behind, so I was going to give each individual who submitted these just a quick chance to summarize them and explain how they think or why they think these inform the deliberations or the work of the task force. So I'll start with Mr. Gaston.
So as a town administrator and second generation administrator, my father worked for Marion Barry. He was the chief operating officer for Marion Barry when he was the mayor, and he sent me he now retired to the city of Phoenix. And one of the issues that they're having is ADUs. They're having the same situation where not my backyard, things of that nature. However, they have a little bit more land. With that being said, they still have concerns about, because they're so close to the border, if you will, that when when folks come over, that unlike this situation where you have 6 people in a household, it goes down to 1. Their situation is they had 2 people in the household, now they have 8. And so it's almost like a reverse. And so that's what they were concerned about in the city of Phoenix, because they are so close to the border. So that's what that was about.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And others,
Ms.
please
Bulow?
feel free as we go through this process. If you do come across something, we'll just keep adding it to the inventory. Go ahead, Deborah.
I just was researching zoning in Leesburg for a different reason and came across the information about how they treat ADUs, and they're very specifically focused on ADUs as meant for families, just for families to be able to use. And I think I get stuck a little bit on our rental discussion, and I know that maybe that's the stickier, trickier thing for us to deal with. And so maybe that's why we're focusing so much on it. But I think that's excluding the people who are not doing it for rental reasons. And the majority of people who come to me to design ADUs or to have them done are doing it for their own personal reasons, for caretakers or adult children or, whatever else. And also building an ADU is quite an expense. You're not going to make a lot of money off of it for rental purposes for a while. It's going to take some time to recoup the cost on that. So I don't want us to exclude the conversation of
Sure. No, it's great.
Homeowners.
I think Maryland may end up leading the pack in terms of our ultimate thesis on all of this before we're done.
Next,
Tiffany.
next resources from Ms. Harris.
Okay, so really quickly, I did want to reference the HUD release that Susan discussed. In addition to how rental rates will be handled or rental income, it also discussed home equity conversion mortgages as well as appraisal protocols. So I know we talked about that a little bit as far as value. So that was my tidbit on that. So I will encourage you to read that also. But these were just follow-up resources from some statistics and survey that the National Association of Realtors and Maryland Realtors conducted at the beginning of the year. So this was just supporting what I discussed in the last meeting as far as reasons that residents are moving. In addition to affordability, there are some other issues, and then also feedback on approval of ADUs and once it was explained during the survey. So it was just supporting that.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Amy, online, can you unmute and share what you provided us?
Yes, as a follow-up, I wanted to share the resources that were at our disposal when we updated our comprehensive plan. At the time, and it started a little earlier, but then ended up on a concurrent track. Our Department of Housing and Community Development was doing a very deep dive on an affordable housing, on a housing study. And most of that focus was on affordable housing and on workforce housing. And they had hired a consultant who had conducted a housing financial analysis, which I have provided that memorandum. And that study guided the Queen Anne's County housing document, housing policy document, which then facilitated a work group, and all of those component parts enabled us in our housing section of our comprehensive plan to incorporate those strategies. So I wanted to share those documents with the group and with the larger population who may not be engaged in these planning exercises, just to illustrate how having good data can take you to the place that your comprehensive plan needs to be, because we are now in the process of updating our zoning code, which is now informed by not only this housing study, but the conversation that we are having now, meeting at this table. And a lot of the topics that are being debated around this roundtable this morning are ideas that are identified in this housing study, are incentives that we are encouraged to look at. But what I can say about providing this data and having a back and forth with Joe, because at the last meeting, I also volunteered to provide some of our housing unit analysis, which we keep at the ready, because I think I had mentioned our community has maxed out in terms of our serving our growth area through the county's wastewater treatment plant. So we're keeping a very close analysis and keeping close tabs on our sewage capacity and the dwelling units we have on the books and potential for additional ADUs or dwelling units. And some of this conversation about infill development, making sure that we're providing opportunities for mixed use development as we are updating our code, is informed by these needs and informed by our capacity limitations. But I would also note that a part of this conversation that I would like to explore further related to these studies and how we're actually going to adapt our zoning codes appropriately is that when I hear us, and I do it myself, commingling multifamily uses and bona fide accessory dwelling uses. In most zoning codes, certainly in ours, accessory dwelling units, when they are actually accessory to a single family development, don't count against density. So that's just a part of what the study asks us to look at in terms of density. And I just see this as a part of the conversation that we should be having about ADUs.
Thank you, Amy. In light of time, Joe, just walk us through these remaining slides. Then we're going to take a 5-minute stretch break.
Sure.
For those of you that are online, know that we are going to stick to the agenda as it relates to public comment from 11:15 to 11:30. I may move around other aspects of the agenda to make sure that we get to where we need to be. But let's just kind of run through
I'll do
this and then we'll take a 5-minute
I'll do
break.
this quickly. I'm not going to read these to you, but you all received our inventories of Maryland ADU codes and other state legislation. I want to thank Theo and his team again for so much work on the state legislation spreadsheet. This is also in the meeting materials. So I'm not I'm not going to read these to you, but here's some of the legislative purpose statements from some of that state legislation. Gives you a sense of why those states enacted it. As a reminder, you know, the SB 3.2 requires us to look at best practices, but it also says survey and document a representative sampling of state and local codes, right? And that's what this exercise is. Can go next. We have also legislative purpose or ordinance purpose statements for Maryland. And I'm not going to go into details of these, but I encourage you to look at them because some of them really talk about the affordable housing side of it, but they also address that facility aspect of it, that design, the neighborhood compatibility aspect, all the things we've talked about here. So they all have their different purpose statements. Go on. And then the spreadsheets that you received are very dense. We're not going to be able to go through them today. Like, I hope you all have fully prepared statements to respond to what I sent you, but we're not going to do that. But instead, we're going to break it down over the course. These may slightly change depending on some of the research methodology I'm going to describe later. But we want to break these down. So in November, we'll look at by right versus conditional or special exceptions. You know, in December, we'll look at the lot requirements, and we'll compare those both in the state legislation and in the Maryland inventory. And we'll analyze these one by one. So these will be like more intense, focused discussions on each of these issues that we've touched on lightly today and last month, and then on and on and on. Again, they may have to change, but this is our proposal how we will address these specific areas.
For the inventory part of our charge.
Yes, for the inventory. I mean, I think we
There's
can
other
also,
aspects to our charge.
I think we
This is
can
the
kind of incorporate some of the best practices
it
in there
may
too.
Go back and forth,
Yeah.
but yeah, this is a specific task.
Yes, and that's so I encourage you to look at those. If you have any questions about those inventories, let us know. But like I said, they're pretty dense and rich. And you want to take a break now?
Yeah, we're going to take a 5-minute break. I am putting on my timer.
I think we're going to get started again. The task force can please return to their seat.
Okay. One of the big objectives of today is the prioritization. This is not the end all, but it begins to sort of get us to focus, because as you can, if you haven't ascertained, this could get so big because there's just so many aspects of housing, and then housing connects to equity, connects to transportation, connects to, you know, workers. I mean, there's just, it could be unending, and it's so, this dialogue is so needed. But to ensure that we consider all of those connectivities, but focus in on our job, we sort of started this approach to prioritization. And we started that with some polling and some surveys and whatnot that we're going to share with you today. And then we do have some discussion questions that we'll spend a few minutes on. I am committed, because we had announced it in the public comment, to break 10:15 or 11:15, allow for any public comment, and then we'll try to bring closure in that last half hour to our meeting today. But look, we're going to spend a few minutes on this. So in terms of the prioritization, I'll let Joe tee us up with the surveys and the information that we have as a start point, and then we have a couple discussion questions. Joe?
Thank you, Secretary Flora. So the table on the right I showed you all last time, but since then I sent the task force the exact same prioritization question that was asked of planning contacts over the summer. There are far more planning contacts that responded, and I mean, just because there's so far more of them. When I checked this last Friday, there was only 12 task force members that have replied. So some of you could still reply.
Out of our
to that.
total, how many of us are there? 15?
16 or yeah,
Yep.
I should remember that number. It's right around there. So I know that there's some that are missing. So but it's still a good example of some or some comparisons here. So just understand the sum weighted total. I'm no statistician, but I gave more weight to priority. If somebody responded priority 1, right? I multiplied that by 3. Priority 2 multiplied by 2, and then priority 3 is just a 1. So that's where the sum weighted total comes from. So you'll see it's probably hopefully people in the virtual audience should see this well. But I want to talk about some similarities and differences here. So both groups prioritize best practices and examples. That's good. That's what the legislation says, as well as model local legislation and ordinances. Both deprioritize ADU data and housing market analyses. All right, some other comparisons are that design guidelines, parking requirements, and affordability are mid-level priorities for both of these groups, but then there are distinct differences. So the groups definitely differ on state legislation, where it is a highest priority or ties for the highest priority with the task force and is at the lowest priority for planning contacts. And they also differ in aging in place, overcoming local opposition, permitting code enforcements, and infrastructure capacity. So there is some alignment, some differences. So you can go to the next slide, and we're going to have some discussion questions for these. We'll go with the first one. Just hit, it's animated, so you just hit next. There we go. So why do you think the prioritization responses align in some areas and diverge in others?
And Joe, just to remind us, the planning context survey, who did that primarily include?
So that went out to all of our planning contacts to jurisdictions with planning and zoning authority. The reason we call it planning contacts, not planning directors, is because not every jurisdiction with planning and zoning authority has a planning department. So a lot of those are going to be planning directors, but some of them are going to be town managers, sometimes even clerks for our really smaller jurisdictions. So our primary planning contact at all jurisdictions with planning and zoning authority.
And this is the Maryland Department of Planning database, because we have to be in touch with all of these people on a regular
We do
basis.
our best to maintain it, but you can imagine with hundreds and hundreds of them, it's not perfect. But yes.
So I would frame this as the divergence between the people on the ground, in the trenches, on the front line, working in this realm from a primarily, regulatory in most cases perspective versus this really wonderful diverse group coming at it from all variety of perspectives. And there were some divergence, but it's not scientific, as Joe mentioned. But any thoughts? Anyone want to sort of just share, what they're thinking in terms of that?
Legislation part, is that the idea that promulgating some kind of state legislation?
So the question wasn't that specific. The question was, which topic areas related to ADUs should the task force prioritize? So just state legislation, just like that.
Oh,
it doesn't have a lot of explanation.
Okay, that's it.
Okay, good. Any other thoughts, opinions on this, Chelsea? Oh, did you? Okay.
I just had a brief comment. So I think that generally, and this is just, I think because our perspectives are so different when we work in the disability and aging space, that normally planners aren't as engaged with people like myself or Priscilla. And it's just simply because of the historical context. So I think that having us at the table is helpful just to inform their practices too.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Chelsea. Back to Kelsman, you had an added comment?
I noticed there was a big divergence on infrastructure capacity, but I do think that is something that we do need to be talking about and thinking about, because that's just the reality of who we're making recommendations to other jurisdictions. And as you can tell from, being number 2 with the planning contact survey, I think that is a critical issue that we need to somehow touch on a little bit. So.
Great, thank you. So we have a second question, and I think it's sort of like, how does the prioritization of Maryland's planning context inform the work? Were you surprised by the divergence on some of these key topics, or how do you think that that's going to help us really think about this? Is this something that you feel is kind of important for us to be looking at maybe differently than we would have otherwise, or you personally. Any thoughts on that? Yes, over here, Theo.
I've been a little bit fortunate too. I've worked in local government in addition to working in state government. And I think a dynamic that often plays out, not saying it's good or bad, but a dynamic that often plays out between the state and local is the state will identify a problem and often identify and attempt to do a solution, but then leave it up to the locals to actually execute that. And that often leaves the locals kind of hanging where they're saying, you know, oh, you identified X, Y, and Z as a problem. We recognize that X, Y, and Z as a problem, but the solution that you put forward is either not workable or, you know, involves a lot more work or involves a lot more funding than we put forward. And I think there's an inherent tension that we just have to recognize. Now, at the same time, the state plays a role because, as we've all said, local officials may be getting additional pressures from their community that state officials may not be getting. And there's a benefit in that, you know, the state officials can sometimes be more aggressive than the local officials. But I really think, you know, that tension of the state trying to lead the way and the locals, I don't want to say the locals are trying to hold us back, but the locals recognizing the realistic limitations of the state being very aggressive. And
Great.
that's it.
Great, thank you. Any other perspective on this in terms of the viewpoints here that we're trying to make sure we include in terms of those implementing on the ground? Yeah, Jennifer.
I think this is very well stated of when I look at this and see what, you know, the Maryland planning contacts and how that can inform the work is very much so of the individuals who need to have the reality of it and the reality of what that implementation looks like, and looking at it from that opposite, not necessarily opposite perspective as well, but you at some point, this needs to be a tangible element that can be implemented, and understanding what it takes to implement that, I think will be very helpful. Whereas I think the divergence was already stated, this is a group looking at all aspects of it. And I think that's fantastic, and we need to have that, but also understanding in the end, something will be implemented, not necessarily directly out of this task force, you know, from that direction, but in the end, understanding that these individuals are looking at this of, well, what do we do next and how do we make this happen? And those considerations and concerns certainly need to weigh in heavily for the conversations we're having also.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. Okay, so where we want to go with this is that I think the question I have for the group before we leave this one is, this survey was put together early in the process. I mean, we really wanted to start getting out there and getting some information. And so based on some of the previous, like for instance, best practices and examples encompasses a lot, right? I mean, the buckets, maybe we'd probably maybe even ask different questions as we've sort of delved into this. But as you look at this survey, are there any big, can you go back, Susan, to the other one? Are there any big topics that we haven't already discussed? Because I think we added a few as we went through those earlier slides, and those are captured, that you feel like we need to have on this list for us to really be able to ensure we've thought about all of these big buckets of topic areas.
I do think that we need to be, I know we've touched on it, but I don't really see it anywhere up there unless I missed it, is, you know, the costs associated with, you know, because if we make certain recommendations and we haven't really considered the cost related to it, we're not really, you know, practically, we're not going to achieve something, because if, you know, our recommendations are such that it's going to drive up the costs, that it's not going to be an affordable housing unit, you know, we're kind of missing the mark. So I do think we need to be very much thinking about how development costs play into all of this.
So Dan, we have a housing affordability. I think what I'm hearing from you is ensuring that we don't create so many layers and so many added hoops that it just keeps driving up the cost. Therefore, the pro forma makes it impossible for these types of units to be
correct.
Is that, I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're
Housing
saying.
affordability, I guess I'm saying even before you get to that point, just the reality is whether, you know, I'm building a ADU as an individual or if I was doing some sort of, however you're doing it, is how much it's going to cost is going to impact what kind of rental, what my rental rate is. Just realistically, that's just the reality. And so as you keep on adding complexities and layers and requirements, then you could price somebody that were, out of the unit. So
it defeats the purpose of some of the goals, right? Exactly. Correct. Great. Thank you. Deborah, you have your hand up. Your hand. Thank you.
Just quickly, I think we touched on the historical context, and I think that's a great thing to add to this discussion. I don't know if it would be its own separate, topic of conversation or not, but it's, I thought it was really important just for us to ground ourselves in what we're talking about, where it comes from, and where we're going.
Yeah, as I look at some of this, it's sort of just a kind of almost an overriding of why do we have what we have? And,
It's just like they remember. Start. And then
especially as it relates to the context of some of these existing neighborhoods. Yep. Thanks, Deborah. Priscilla.
So I want to sort of ditto what Chelsea said. I find it really kind of appalling that the planning contacts put aging in place as such a very, very low priority. And we put it as the top priority. One of us is out of touch. Either this committee is out of touch or they're out of touch. But, I think there's such a disconnect about how we look at ADUs. Is it just to bring in all this money and have short-term rentals and do all these crazy things? Or is it to allow families and people to stay in their homes and make it affordable? And I don't think we're out of touch. So, I wonder what's going on in these municipalities and counties. If they really are devaluing what I think is the most important and valuing things that we find is less important.
Great. I think that's a perfect segue actually into the next segment, but do we have one more thought?
So aging in place, families staying together is the main reason for ADUs.
Well, and I think the segue that I am going for with that is that deeper dive. And so how do we get some deeper information? This is sort of so superficial. There's so many pieces of it. But Susan, if you want to advance us to this next segment, the public input segment and research methodology. So one of the other discussions that we really wanted to have with this group, there's a couple of slides that'll lead up to that, is we do want to consider, well, why is that disconnect, right? Talk to those folks rather than just a online thing, or have focus group with specific groups that maybe we need to talk about. And so this is where we want to take a moment of our time here to get your thoughts on, we can do a lot of online research, we can reach out, we can do a lot of what you've already seen. And now as we prioritize some of these things, particularly where we're seeing these divergence, how do we get under the surface of that a little bit more? So the staff has teed up a couple of slides on this one for us to have some discussion around. Joe, you want to take us with that?
I think this would be good. I know you wanted to at 11:15 go into public comments. So I think it's good to talk about public comment now that we have received, maybe is a good transition. Then we can come back to research methodology after that. This is extremely small, I know, on the screen, but you all have received it in both your presentations and the full document of all the online comments received. That's also in the meeting materials. So this is just kind of at a glance, ones that were maybe mentioned in some form multiple times. I added on here are a couple comments about ADUs aren't just a housing issue. They also support economic development, job growth, local economies, and employment. But there were a fair number of comments that were warning us about or warnings about ADUs, right? One was that it have a negative impact on neighborhood character and sustainability. There are a couple comments about the loss of open space and the creation of pervious land cover as impact on stormwater management. There were a couple comments about how state legislation can overcome NIMBYism as needed. There were comments about ADUs, if ADUs are going to be viable and actually contribute to communities, you have to consider the infrastructure impacts, the water and sewer capacity, and code enforcement. There was a number of comments about code enforcement. I think a lot of these will match what you saw in the planning context survey responses. Couple comments about removing as many regulatory barriers as possible to ADUs. Then there are a couple comments about ADU ordinances will encourage investors to buy up properties, and it's actually not going to be homeowners that are developing these, but investors. There were conflicting comments on the one size fits all. Some said, there was one in there that I removed names, but I kept my name in there, and they said that I was wrong by saying that one size does not fit all, that we actually need state legislation on this issue, that there has to be a one size fits all solution. Then there was other comment saying exactly, yes, one size does not fit all, and that our approach should be regional. If not saying regional, it needs to consider the different characteristics and needs of different communities. There was quite a few discussions about how we go about our research. Must include homeowners and any focus groups. We'll be talking about our qualitative approach probably after the public comment. But, there's comments like saying all people that are against ADUs aren't all NIMBYs. And I think a couple people in the comments took umbrage at that comment or that term. And that if we are really going to be addressing this and including all perspectives, we need to include homeowners in our focus groups. There are conflicting comments on ADUs and aging in place. I know we talked about this a lot. Some said it was a great aging in place strategy. There was one at least that said this is not really a viable aging in place strategy, and that is overblown. That ADUs are not necessarily affordable. All right, there's a couple comments about this that, especially in higher income, higher cost jurisdictions, that ADUs don't just assume that they're going to be affordable, and that they're also, you need to accompany any ADUs with tenant protections. This goes beyond just ADUs, but this would just be a comment about rental protections. And that if we want this to succeed, homeowners need financial incentives to construct ADUs. And one comment I didn't put up here, but I thought was interesting on there, it was more of a question to the task force, is that have any members of the task force ever faced housing uncertainty? And I thought that was a good question for us all to keep in mind. That person didn't say anything more than that.
That's really.
But I think that that's an important concept. And then there are a number of other things in the comments that were, I want to help the task force with this, which is great. I didn't put those up here, but we will be following up with those individuals who want to get involved. They had resources, research, they want to get more involved in like our actual activities. So we have a few minutes before we take new public comment, but I don't know if there are any thoughts, feedback, or reactions on either this slide or what you've seen in the full document.
I just want to say that I did read through all of them, and I hope everyone, will each time take a moment to do that. There's some really good constructive inputs, and to folks that are out there listening in on this, thank you. I think, this is a tough topic. If it were just by itself of can my mother live in my backyard somewhere, that would be simple, probably. Can my 2 daughters and 3 grandchildren move in with me during COVID? That's simple, and I will have just tripled my garbage on the street. But there's a broader implications, and really appreciate how much interest there is out there in the public and everything that we're doing. This is not a public hearing. This is really an opportunity to really kind of look at this from every lens. So I want to thank the folks that really take the time to do this. We're going to keep that public comment form active and live on the website. And, I think commit as a task force to be definitely reading through these. The staff will keep summarizing for us, but I think it's important that we all take the time to read through them also. But I think the one that Joe just mentioned is one that really did strike me, of that comment of, has anyone ever experienced, how did they put it, housing uncertainty? Yeah, I know my daughters have come back home to mom at times, but that's very lightly a topic that's a very heavy topic. Any other thoughts on this, and then we will move to take any public comments we have in the room. Yes, Priscilla.
If whether they're planning professionals or whether they're just people like us. I mean, like maybe
Right, do we have any more demographic data on the people making the comments? Joe, what do we take in on those forms?
I think we just asked what jurisdiction they represent. And a number of people, we didn't ask them to give us like all that personal information. We wanted these also to be anonymous if they wanted to be. So some people gave us information. I removed names. Some people said, please call me, email me. They put that right in their comment. I removed that. You know, we can get in touch with these individuals. But for this, I didn't put names in it. So we have that information for some, but not others, because we did want to make it anonymous if people wanted it to be anonymous.
But Joe, we could do through the form a search to sort of say that 80% of them came from the Eastern Shore, for instance. We could do that
Yes.
search if we wanted to
Yes.
really dive down and understand, like, for instance, geographic distribution at some point along the way to sort of get a sense of where are most of the comments coming in from, kind of thing.
Yes, we could do
Is that right? Yeah.
Mhm.
Other questions about this process that's ongoing?
Just wanted to kind of just touch base when we were looking at kind of going back just a little bit, but prioritization between what we were saying, what the planning context was saying. I think one thing we need to keep in mind, and it's been a while since I took statistics, but our sample size of what we as a task force did was much smaller than compared to the planning group. So that might be why there's some variance, because you had touched on the aging in place. And there was a lot of people that had positive feedback about that. So I think, you know, it would be nice if everybody filled out our form in the task force, but our sample size is smaller. So it just was going to make that comment when we're kind of thinking about this stuff, and even the public comment too, where that's coming from. That's why the demographic data might be interesting.
Yeah, thanks for that. And we know it's not scientific. I think the interesting thing is more the divergence, you know, that this group, because of the broad sense of perspective that we all bring, you know, is looking at this slightly different in some cases, very different in some cases than what the folks down on the ground are implementing. And so the comparative, I think, is going to be more around that. But thank you. I think we have to keep it.
That might not
Yeah.
be the case.
Yeah. Right. Right. But well, we won't be adding more members, but we would ask that everyone respond.
12 responses from this team, this task force, even though 4 people didn't respond yet, if 12 say this is a priority, that's pretty significant. I mean, I understand that you don't have a whole lot of data. You can't create a big control chart with that, but it's very significant.
Yes. No, you're right. I'm not going to go back to my statistics classes. We'll just let this go, I think, for now. Okay, it is 11:15 by my watch, 11:16 actually. And so we are going to open it up for public comment. We're going to take any comments from folks in the room first. Please keep them short. And then while we do that, I'm asking the folks online, the public online, to add any comments you may have into the chat. We're going to grab those and look at them, but we won't be able to bring you into the fold here. We'll just be reading through those comments. Joe, anything else forgot about that process?
There have been some public comments already added to the chat quite a bit. So we asked that people, we're not going to go back to ones that have already been added just for time. If anything added from this point forward on the chat, we will read. So if you have one, you added one earlier, please like duplicate it. Copy it again, just so we can make sure we get everybody in here to speak, and then we provide an option online as well. But we will start.
Yes, so it's all saved, but we're just going to look at what's recorded now during this public comment.
From this point on, we're going to look at what's recorded and
thank you. So Joe's going to MC over there and
so
see if we have any.
your name, what if you represent an organization or a jurisdiction, and then make your comment.
Hi, my name is Jessica Bird. I actually design tiny houses. It is my hope to bring minimalistic living and sustainability to the state of Maryland. I really liked what Rebecca Flora just said. I actually wrote it down about how this idea is much bigger than what we're talking about right now. And what I'm kind of referring to is inclusivity. Not every person that wants to own a home know someone that already owns a home or has the land to build an accessory dwelling unit. And so we're missing a huge chunk of the population that wants to become homeowners in Maryland, but cannot afford the single family homes that we currently have, or they are the first generation of homeowners or home buyers in their family, and they don't have someone for an ADU. So I think that that's something that you guys need to add to your I guess objectives of trying to kind of solve that problem too, of kind of including everyone, because it's not just just people who already know homeowners. And yeah, that's kind of it, my idea.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in the room? Remember, say your name, organization, jurisdiction, whatever you like.
Yes, sir. My name is Henry Munoz. I'm with Mod Podz, and we are a Maryland builder. We specialize in tiny homes, and I'm also a realtor in my other life. And so I can speak from the standpoint of both what we're encountering as Mod Podz, but also what I've encountered as a realtor, talking with people looking to get housing. And I can second what the young lady just spoke here, because we do have a significant section of the populace that are looking to get into housing, and there are significant barriers to people being able to get into their first house. And there's also a significant amount of people who would like to get housing, particularly the younger adults. They are interested in housing, but they're not necessarily interested in the size that most current housing, exists in terms of single family homes. I have a question. Well, I have a couple questions, but one of the questions that I wanted to know is what is it that it'll take to allow for tiny home builds as a primary residence rather than as an ADU capacity? That's a reality that needs to be really looked at. There are plenty of people who, in their mind, it makes way more sense for me to go find a plot of land. It might cost me $35,000, $50,000. And then if I can get a tiny home built, and let's say if that costs $150,000, well, now you're talking about $200,000 for an acre of land with a tiny house. Now you actually, on an acre of land, you can put 4 or 5 tiny homes, because an average plot for an average single family home is about 1/10 of an acre. So these are things for people to consider. And then also I do want to ask at least one other question, and that is, what is it that has the task force considered the ideas that, because I heard some of the last things we were talking about, the ADUs and tiny homes are for aging in place and families staying together, versus the idea that it's for more rental revenue, both short and long term. Has it been considered that both ideas can be right at the same time? Because that's a real thing as well.
Great. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Mod Pod.
Mod Podz, this is our take on modular, smaller homes. What we build are not tiny homes so much as small homes. We build them on the scale, but we use all of the same regulations as if we were going to build a house. This is something that we have come face to face with from many angles, where most people tend to think, when you think of a tiny home, you think of something that's built as sturdy as this table, which is not very. But when we build them, it's just like a house. Everything about it is just that it is smaller. I heard you guys talk about regulations earlier, and this is something that really has to be looked at. And you're going to have to remove a lot more barriers, because we're also getting into a certain constitutionality viewpoint that many people are looking into, which is there's too much government overreach. If this is my land and I own this, why do you get to tell me that I can't put, and I have plenty of land, how come I can't put a space for my my grandmother or my aging what do you want to say, my older child who is ready to leave but not really ready to leave, so
Or came back.
or came back, exactly. So it's more than simply, and even if it is, I want to put something so I can have an Airbnb, that is being,
Now you're going into a hot topic.
well, yeah.
So we need to give other people an opportunity. Thank you.
Alan Leaks. I'm with modpods.us as well.
Yeah, I love everything I've heard today. I think it's right on point. And I don't think we're going to get away from ADUs. It's here, you know, much like cell phones, if you want to think about it. But it's going to happen. But I love the committee. I like the diversity here. And I think, you know, Madam Chairperson, something you said, I really like. I like to approach things in a manner where if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it to the utmost. Meaning, we in Maryland, it's coming. We can be ahead of it throughout the country. So we're getting comment people how to implement type of ideas. So that's basically what I'm saying.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for your comments.
Any other comments in the room? Oh, yeah.
Also, yeah, I'm coming from a different perspective. I have a software development background, working for government, risk averse environments, large scale impact. Just want to add to all the commentary here by saying in your objective to create a report, taking in the perspective that not all of this has to be tackled at once, right? If we're launching a software product or an application, we don't just put it out there into the environment, we phase it in. So in looking at all of the different aspects and creating maybe a risk matrix of some sort, you can determine what is going to be the least amount of risk that we can start with and then phase in some of the more complex concepts. So, you know, just something that I think is going to be necessary when the state looks at all of the different use cases and scenarios, as you mentioned earlier. I think that's a wonderful way to tackle it because you can look at all of the surrounding issues based on each persona that may be affected. So
Great, thank you. And I love the analogy. Another question, another comment.
If we have time, can I come back to you since you already spoke, but we want to make sure we have room for people in there, but.
Jeff Hill, live in resident of Smyrna Park, Anne Arundel County. I work for Southway Builders. We're provide affordable housing projects, LIHTC. I'm also a part of Maryland Affordable Housing Coalition. Couple of comments. I think the issue around parking and infrastructure needs to be looked at more from a data-driven rather than a hearsay issue. I think there's a lot of data out there that might contradict what perceptions are about the needs there. I think I want to reiterate what the senator said about the reason that we're here in housing, what I would consider a crisis, is very intentional. This was not by accident. I think that the design in the mid-40s of our zoning regulations and HOAs and all of that was very restrictive, and it was around who could be in our communities and who could not be in our communities, I think. And so we need to really address that issue seriously. And I think California has a model that we might want to consider and do some research there.
Great, thank you.
We're going to go to those
online.
I'm sorry, and go ahead.
Oh, hi, my name's Imani Jastrom with the City of Baltimore Planning Department. And to piggyback on that comment about parking, I think it's important to not blame ADUs for existing parking issues. So we have a lot of row home development, houses that are right next to each other and aren't wide enough to have street parking for 2 cars in front of them, since most households now are, if there's 2 adults in it, each adult has a car. It's not set up to have that much parking anyway. So when we're looking at what parking issues may arise, let's look at how the built environment doesn't provide enough parking already before we start saying that the ADUs are going to take it away, because in reality, there's often just not enough parking anyway for how people live modernly in an existing built up environment. I understand that it's going to be different in some suburban contexts where you do have room to have 2-3 cars on the street parked directly in front of your house. But in jurisdictions where that's not the case, I think that's an important thing to consider.
Thank you. So we're going to read through.
Take comments typed into, I want to remind the virtual audience, we're not, we're just taking comments that are typed in the chat. We're not unmuting members of the audience. So I will look at what we have starting at 11:15. We have times. Whoop, whoop. All right, well, now you all can see it on the screen.
Yeah, feel free to stand up and just look
All
at
right,
it if
where's
you
Tom? All
want.
right, starting to go. Can you go scroll up for me, Susan? Got a lot. All right.
So Joe, you're not gonna be able to read all of those.
All right. Well, I'll keep a couple.
And then we'll make sure everyone gets a copy
All right.
of
See,
it.
can you close this? Somebody's asking to keep it private. You don't mind? Just minimize it. All right. This is what we're gonna do, Susan. Sorry. Can we stop sharing our screen? We'll stop sharing. That way the chat will not be shown online. And then I will just go to the chat. Yeah, you're good. All right, now people online can't see it. All right. But they can't see that.
They can see us.
They can see them, but only people in the room can see the chat. All right, I'm not gonna read all of these, obviously. There's too many. But we'll start here.
I would say this is a public comment. If folks have comments that you would like to sort of share privately, go to the public, go to the comment form, because that's going to be very difficult in this public comment period to do it otherwise.
All right, so one comment is make sure we consider a fair housing lens throughout the process, encouraging proactivity. Someone said the divergence on aging in place probably has to do with planners' necessity to consider workforce housing as well. Let's go down. All right, there's somebody who's a little confused about the purpose of the task force. If it is to create an affordable housing mechanism, then where's the discussion surrounding restrictive covenants and income-based subsidies or building and or rent? All right, parking requirements will totally kill ADUs and where they're most needed in more dense areas. The impact on infrastructure will be to use infrastructure more efficiently. Those people will live somewhere, and wherever they are, they'll require the same services. ADUs actually spread the load by providing diversity. Nobody's raising 2 kids in an ADU. Go down, down. Oh. All right, I'm just gonna have to run out of time. As the task force continues its work, we at Maryland Realtors think it is important to consider what issues are specific to ADUs as opposed to those that are also applicable to existing housing and new construction. Our statewide housing shortage demands that new units will be built, but it is a matter of where, at what price, and what form those units will take. Okay, so ADUs are, they have, what about other housing? All right, go
So
scroll
Joe,
down.
we're going to cut this one off.
Okay.
Um,
We're saving all of the comments from the chat and will be added to our public record.
And we'll be committed to at least 15 minutes at each meeting for this opportunity, but really the people in the room will always have priority. I will start timing it in the room, and we'll record all of these. And of course, people that are online can see what others are saying, and we'll be able to get that information also. So while you're pulling us back up to the portion about the purpose of the task force, the Senate bill is online. It's available for people to read if you're out there in the public to very specifically understand what our task is. To be very clear, this is about ADUs. It's just that it's going to be difficult to talk about ADUs without talking about it in the context of the broader housing issues we're facing in Maryland. So it is more than likely that we will come up with some type of a appendix or something, because it would be really unfortunate to not capture all of these other conversations and information in some manner and be able to produce some sort of a product from that. But it is not our primary purpose. Our primary purpose is to go back to the General Assembly with a report, not action, but a report specific to what we've been tasked for in the legislation, which is specific to ADU, and really understanding the issue, because right now it's all over the place. As we can see in the various ordinances, it's all over the place in Maryland. And some could make the case that that's a good thing, and some could say it's a bad thing. We're going to try to get through all of that and figure out what we can do to help make it, I think, easier for people to assess at the local level, and for the General Assembly to decide if they have a role. That'll be their decision. So with that, we are going to move for about 10 minutes on the discussion questions that have been set up here around our added research methodology. And then we'll kind of go over next steps and closing round. What's that? Okay, are people still able to hear us? Joe, are people still able to hear us? Okay, then we're going to keep moving here, and I apologize because you can't hear me, perhaps anyways. So discussion questions. I don't know if you can, but the first one is, other than what's been discussed today, what are examples and best practices support? I think we can skip over that one. You all have been submitting that. I think what we really want to
I would
get
like to talk a little bit briefly about our research methodology before we
Okay.
get into the questions. I'm sorry for that technical issue there. Give me a second. All right, we did have, so the housing market analysis or the impacts on local housing markets as defined in the bill is something we still need to address. We're going to be focusing a lot of attention on it at our next meeting. We did have a meeting, DHCD staff, MDP staff, and the National Center for Smart Growth, some partners that work on housing in that organization down at the University of Maryland, about potential options. We will be presenting our approach at the next meeting. It is going to be more qualitative than quantitative. I did send a request out to all those planning contacts who completed that survey to send me their ADU permitting data if they collected it. I didn't get many responses. I got two, one saying that didn't have ADU specific permitting data, and then I did get response from Rockville. I will follow up with them. But the fact of the matter is that under the scope of this task force, with its time, with the lack of funding, we will not have the capability to do a full quantitative housing market analysis using ADU permitting data. So we'll take a more of a qualitative approach where we use focus groups, interviews with locals and others. They can talk about the barriers to this actually becoming a viable housing market product. And we will explore talking with those outside of the state that have demonstrated more of a proliferation of ADUs. I did, as I mentioned earlier, I contact SStat staff to find out how they track ADUs and how that impacts appraisals. They're looking into it. They'll get back to me. As I showed earlier, we are going to be breaking up those inventories by different topic areas, but we are also, at the same time, we're going to be doing focus groups, interviews, probably inviting guest speakers on those respective topics at the same time. I will be following up, especially when I talk about next steps, seeking task force members to be involved with this. This is not something that staff is going to be able to do all on its own. So we will, some of this will happen in between, and then some of these will happen at the meetings themselves. And we'll continue to do the best practice literature review. Staff will be focusing on that. There is potential that we'll get some more support from other organizations, perhaps the National Center, but I'm definitely not guaranteeing that. But they have been already very helpful with us in providing some suggestions. So that will be addressed. But like I said, we will have a specific approach to share with you at the next meeting. And now we can go on to the discussion questions related to that. Okay. All right. Other than what has been discussed, I'm sorry, Secretary Flora, would you like to lead this? Go ahead.
Well, I'm just once again mindful of time. So I think if I could just go back to the methodology again for a minute, Joe or Susan. I think the key thing is here, there's a lot of information out there. And there was a point at which the literature review is going to become overly exhaustive. And so, and I think it's going to start repeating itself, anyone who's been involved in these types of literature reviews. So there will be a point where we might keep doing an inventory, but I think for what we need to know to be able to start putting together some outcomes, that part is well underway and under control beyond what we all have time to necessarily even read it all. So we'll do our best there. I think the big thing that I see, and tell me if you think I'm wrong, is that it's the inputs, the inputs that we feel are balanced around maybe the gaps of who aren't we talking to or who do we need to hear from. We're hearing from, to the best we are able to get responses to the folks, the planners, so to speak, and those agencies on the ground. You know, you all reflect this incredible cross-section, I think, of practitioners and associations from different perspectives. Who else do we need to hear from as a group that is not already represented here? or that we're already reaching out to, because that's where I start pinpointing this notion of focus groups or I guess speaker type. And that's something that I think it gets into the discussion questions a little bit, but I would love to just take a moment right now and just say, is there a particular perspective that we don't feel is represented around this table or we're going to keep getting public comment that we would really like to hear from? Anybody? Yeah, we'll start. Yeah, Chelsea and then David.
So I would say individuals who work in disaster housing. It's a bit different than an ADU, but it's more of like a temporary structure. So it is something to just kind of consider because they are small, they're temporary, and they're needed for any sort of natural disaster situation. So I have colleagues I could put you all in touch with that could inform that.
Thanks, Chelsea. David?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think the loyal opposition is represented. This group, everybody's generally in favor. We may have different viewpoints, but I think what I'd like to do is invite sort of an umbrella community association to see what they think. And I'm sure they'll come in with various objections that we should be aware of. We're going to hit them. The legislature is going to hit them. We might as well hear it, get the discovery up front.
I think that's fair. Yep. Priscilla?
Well, and mine was similar.
Who's not being
More
heard?
specifically, the homeowner associations. Yeah, that's, I think, absolutely.
Okay, great. Other big gaps that I feel like this group is very representative, I think, of all of the different areas, but any other big gaps because we have a planner over there raising her hand from a community, please.
Thanks. My name is Karen Muro. I'm a principal housing planner for Prince George's County Planning Department. I think it might help the task force to understand some perspectives from people who actually need housing. So some tenant advocacy groups could help, like CASA, just to name one.
Thank you. Okay, be thinking about that because I think we want to be as balanced, as inclusive as possible, but we do want to stay focused on ADU as a specific subset of housing. And so I think that as we look at that last bar there, I think that's the one I'm zeroing in on at the moment because the rest I know is going to keep unfolding. Yeah, Priscilla.
I'm going to add one more. And I consider myself an environmentalist, and I can tell that you consider yourself an environmentalist, but I think environmentalist groups might have a whole different perspective on this.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so we are at 11:42. So Joe, put up the discussion questions, but I think we're going to fold that into a closing round. Unless there's specific, put them all up. Unless there are specific things that you feel like we still yet need to get out of today, I'd like to kind of incorporate all of these into a closing round and people can sort of either pick from this or just their final thoughts from today. Can you put all the questions up? Because they're kind of zooming in. I'm just thinking of getting as much, because my watch is a little different than that clock. Okay, so let's just kind of look at those for a minute. You know, what's been discussed? What are some examples? I think we're going to keep doing that online. Just keep feeding us stuff and we'll keep adding to that inventory. Should we seek additional insight into ADUs from Maryland jurisdictions, and what form should the task force seek this insight? I think we've talked about that, but if you have a particular perspective as we do a closing round, let us know as part of the closing round. Are there other examples of local jurisdictions that we should research? Let's pull that through the online query that we're continuing to do, or if something jumps in your mind on the closing round, go ahead and do that. If we decide to conduct focus groups, invite guest speakers, who should we invite? So obviously I already jumped to the last question of my question I just asked, but anyways, so these are some closing thoughts. What I'd like to propose is that we just go around as part of a closing round. if you have a response to any of this, or if you just have some closing thoughts from what you heard today, this is your chance to put those out there for the group to understand, and then we'll have a few minutes to go over next steps of sort of what's next on our agenda. But I do like to start with the virtual people first, so we make sure we get them in. And so again, who do we have out there? So let's start with Delegate Stewart. Are you still with us? The delegate online, does anyone know?
No, I don't see him.
Okay. Okay. And then the next I would have would be Quinn Griffiths. Are you out there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Any closing thoughts?
No, not really. A very interesting discussion today. I can say from, CAI's perspective, and again, I think there was a few comments about getting some more insight from homeowners associations and kind of the impact that ADUs have or potentially could have on homeowners associations. And I think we've touched on a number of those, talking about the financial impacts. Assessments will go up likely, not only for those individuals that have ADUs, but their community as well. So you've also got infrastructure concerns and things of that nature. So, while we certainly, do support, the affordable fair housing, kind of push, there's also certain ramifications that come into play when you've got homeowner associations involved. And also you've got, board of directors that run these associations, and there's certain powers that these boards have, to set guidelines as far as what can an ADU look like, what color siding can they have, what's the square footage, what's the setback. So there's all kinds of variety of impacts that I look forward to continuing to discuss as it relates to the homeowners association world.
Great. Thanks, Quinn. Amy, are you out there? Amy Murdoch?
I am, thank you. I don't know that I have anything more to add other than noting if we're looking at best management practices and looking at other jurisdictions, codes, and enforcement input, I think that I keep coming back to remembering that ADU is an accessory dwelling unit. And I feel in a lot of ways that we keep commingling the multifamily use with the ADU use. So I think from a zoning perspective, it could be a very easy fix. But all of the other component parts that make those ADUs affordable, that's where pulling all of these strands together is going to become important.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Amy. And thank you for that reminder about keeping these things sorted out of what we're focused on here. Great. Well, let's just go ahead in the room. I'm going to go in the opposite direction this time. So Chelsea, I'm going to start with you.
I don't have a lot of additional comments except just in consideration of universal design features and accessibility in these units. At times, the smaller the unit, the more likely you're going to see ladders, stairs, things that are not accessible for people who are trying to age in place or have a physical disability. And these are the individuals who are more likely to rent and might be low income and really in need of this unit in the community.
Great. Thank you. Deborah?
I have a question. You showed a slide early on of the months and what we're going to focus on each month, but I don't see it in our slide deck in here. Is it in this slide deck? I just didn't see it scrolling through, but it's in the slide deck?
Not what you're asking, and we need to do a better we have a process work plan, but we'll share that with you. I think that's
okay.
What you're
I just found that I'd like to think through the topics ahead of time like that. I thought that was helpful. My other thought that I thought was really helpful was what Jennifer brought to the table early on about creating scenarios. I like that a lot because we do this a lot in our own work and I think I'm understanding it similarly, where we work sort of with avatars and we say, well, this is who we're building for, and create a whole ideal scenario around that situation. It helps you really go from point A to point Z and think through every single element that could be affected by it. So anyway, I would advocate for
a study like that.
Great, thank you. David?
Amy, last time mentioned and just alluded to it this time, how many other issues there are related to ADUs in the building code and everywhere else. I don't think we can tackle all those issues, but what I do think we can tackle is Euclidean zoning, which is the beast that is affecting affordable housing and ADUs. And I think we can get something that focuses on zoning if we keep our focus.
Great, thank you, David. Over to Theo.
Thank you very much. I would say the only closing comment I have is it may be beneficial to bring in some communities that have recently undergone rezoning of ADUs. I don't know exactly where that would fit into the schedule. But either having one community like Anne Arundel or Annapolis, or having a couple different planning director representatives in a panel type discussion may be beneficial, because we are talking, I think we said a lot in abstract about some of these challenges, but understanding the specifics of those challenges may be beneficial.
Thank you.
I really like that panel idea because they have been dealing with some of these issues on the ground. So it would be very beneficial to hear maybe some of their thoughts or comments. I think that's a good idea. I also really think the idea of looking at scenario, taking a look at the scenarios, because that could give you a chance to really kind of, okay, if I'm a homeowner and I'm looking to build a ADU, what is that process going to be like for me? And what are the stumbling blocks? And looking at it from different standpoints, I think that's a great idea. I also like how the intent is to kind of break it down by months, because this is a really complex subject. And I think at some point along the process, we're supposed to be making recommendations, is my understanding. So, in November, we're talking about by right, conditional versus special exception. We can have a really good conversation about that and come to, maybe not everybody's going to be on the same page, but a group consensus of where we're at as far as what our recommendations are for people to consider when looking at that issue. I like the idea that we're breaking it down, because otherwise I think we're going to have a tendency to just kind of talk in circles, and we kind of really need to break it down and to just go through it by bullet points, one meeting at a time, and get to the end result. Thanks.
So not to be repetitive, but I don't have anything additionally to add, but I would say that I think the panel is an amazing idea. I was going to say that I think we do need to hear from communities that have gone through it, what have they faced, and I think that will help in the discussion.
Great, thanks.
I think the scenarios are great, especially if we're looking at converting attic, basement, or garage spaces. We need to make sure at the end of the day, these are occupiable spaces. They are Marylanders, and we need to make sure egress and life safety is addressed for them to have these safe places to live, whether you're for or against. We all deserve a safe place to live.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've been taking notes throughout, and will certainly share all of my notes after. A few I just wanted to touch on, one that you just spoke to as well, of ADU as that standalone or conversion of internal home space, and what does that really look like? A couple of other thoughts, just really focus again on some of what we discussed already, but when we spoke earlier about understanding the history, it almost felt like I was studying for my AICP exam all over again, having to memorize all of the Supreme Court cases, but equity as an overarching theme, and making sure it's not its own standalone as we talk about regulatory or the other components, but making sure that we look at equity in every aspect of those elements. The one thought I had was of possibly thinking through of developing almost a glossary as an output and outcome of this task force, because that way we ensure as we each state something, we can go back to the definition that this task force is looking at for that very specifically. And then the final comment, of course, the scenario planning as a whole, but I wrote down 3 things of really, as we've been talking about ADUs, coming to essentially these 3 overarching areas of affordable housing / new homeowners, and being able to get people into housing. the idea of ADU as a caregiver extended family situation, and then the ADU as a secondary housing rental component / secondary market and that's kind of a preview of some of the thoughts in my head when we start talking scenario planning of we've got those 3 scenarios in addition to, as you spoke to Deborah, of point A to Z, how do we make this happen as well? And so I feel like maybe in some context in the future, we can speak to those kind of 3 types, because they are all going to have, they all need to be to that one, one size fits all, not one size fits all, but in some capacity, those are 3 unique components that we need to understand, address, and then identify how it will all fit back together again.
Great. Thank you for that summary.
Okay, ditto to all that.
Okay.
Really well said. So I want to say, I would recommend, instead of having a panel like from Anne Arundel and Annapolis with their planning people, I would have the 2 people who sponsored the legislation from each one, because they were very, very involved in all the research and creating it. I recently had a discussion with the one who sponsored it from Annapolis and the one who sponsored it from Anne Arundel about how many, because I mentioned last time that they had it. And it was funny because the Annapolis bill went through first, and he said, oh yeah, we made a lot of mistakes. And Lisa said, yeah, and we were able to correct those. We learned from you. So it was really helpful. But they know this bill, they're living it and so on. So I'm sure they would love to come and talk more about that. And they're also both supposed to be looking at how many applications they've had, so I can get that information for the committee. I want to talk just for a second about missing middle housing, because some of the people over here have addressed it. Missing middle is a huge problem. We all know that. It's a terrible problem. It's not going to be solved by ADUs. That's a whole nother ball of wax. And my hope is that, when this bill is presented, some other senators and delegates will come up with some proposals to change a lot of the zoning requirements for missing middle. Because, the concept of putting a whole bunch of modular homes in an area, or tiny homes in an area, is fabulous. It's much better than the old traditional trailer parks. You can have beautiful little communities, but that is not the responsibility of this group. So we can't address that, but please don't lose sight of that. And again, I want to just ditto the whole thing about detached and attached. So many people think of ADUs as being detached units, and that's only one type. We have all different types, whether it's a basement conversion, an attic conversion, or, splitting a house in 2. And I think we need to remember all of those, because then we get into the safety issues, and then we get into all of those other things that help to better accommodate people. I'll make one more comment and I'll shut up. In the next 5 or 10 years, I don't remember the exact number, we're going to have more people over 60 in Maryland than we will elementary school children. So as we're thinking about it, and for anybody to say this is not an option for aging in place is just kind of an uneducated comment, because we need to find a place for all of these people to age. They can't all go into assisted living and independent living. That's just not an option. So we need to think about how we're going to have people age. And we need to also think about attracting more school kids, but that's a whole other issue. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Priscilla. James, you get the last word here.
I appreciate
Well,
that.
except for me, I get the last word. But you
Of course you will. No worries, no worries. Once again, I want to reemphasize or look for a panel discussion. Montgomery County instituted Chapter 8, Section 829B, which dealt with ADUs. And what happened was the 12 cities and towns, Chevy Chase View, Chevy Chase Village, there's 12 of them. They go on and on. What they did was create legislation, and I hate to say counter what was required from the ADUs that was passed by the entire county. They didn't do it because they were trying to keep people out or NIMBY. It was a quality of life issue, and it was also a space issue. And so those folks could give you a real good glimpse as to why, depending on where you are, ADU is not the best option. And so what they did was they said, okay, well, the county has come down with the hammer. We're going to come out with something to counter the hammer to make sure that we don't have to deal with this, because our quality of life is going to go down and our land use issues are going to rise.
Interesting. Thank you. Yeah. Wow. It's like the Wild West. Everybody's kind of got all these pieces. Joe, you want to walk us through next steps and then I'll close us out.
Real quick with the next steps. Okay, so we have an activities report we're finalizing. It's going to the governor and General Assembly tomorrow. It just basically summarizes you all and the things that staff has done and you all have done since we started, or since it became effective in June.
And that's public.
Even before
So
that. It'll be public.
yeah,
Yes.
it'll be on the website.
We will be finalizing our approach to the housing market analysis, and it's going to be one of the main topics at the November meeting. I'm going to be following up with those who have in the public comments have offered assistance, because I think a lot of the ideas you all expressed they can help us with. We're going to establish the qualitative research format and our partners. This will be the focus groups, the interviews, panel discussions, as I've heard multiple times. I will be reaching out to all of you all because this cannot be completed just with me and my staff and our staff. I'm going to need some assistance from task force members in between meetings. So I'll be reaching out to you all about that, how you contribute to this qualitative research format. Continue the best practices review by topic area, because we're going to, as I showed you, we're going to be looking at these all by topic areas as we move forward. And then our next meeting is November 28th. The location is TBD. And as you could see, is if we get the big issue in these, if we do the hybrid meetings, is the task force and members in the room being able to have their voice through sound to the people in the virtual audience. So that's if anybody knows a place that has that all ready to go, we're ready for that meeting. But I want to thank you to David for hosting this meeting. So well done.
Great. Thank you, David.
I actually big thanks to Andrew. Him and I were here late last night. Everything was working last night. There are a couple of problems this morning, but Andrew was a great help. Thank you, Andrew.
Great. Thank you, Andrew, to the whole team. Sorry, Crownsville.
Yeah, I told us the next meeting was in Crownsville. I think didn't you send
I
something?
think in an original email, we reserved the room in Crownsville just so we have that, and that may be where we go. But I'd say officially, it's still TBD. But we do have that room reserved.
My goal is what's going to be easiest to deal with equipment in public, because right now it's still not as easy as I would like. I was accustomed to walking into rooms that were already set up. And so that's a challenge because it takes a lot of time. And I'd rather have that time be invested into this work. And then where is a good, reasonable central location for most people to be able to get to. And we will absolutely keep your invitation on the table, David, as we I appreciate that as we sort of look at what's going to be the best efficient. Okay, I'm going to close this out because it is by my watch 12:02. So I am just continue to be so impressed, so grateful for this group. I do believe the thought of the panel, not only of the people who actually formed this, but then of the people on the ground. I mean, a lot of good ideas, I think, in this closing round are all great. And I think in the end, we've got some fabulous, good perspective, I think, going on here, good, thoughtful things. So I appreciate all of that. The other thing I want to add is this housing crisis in the state of Maryland is huge. And I know, because I talked directly with Secretary Day with DHCD about it all the time. He and I go way back, and he was actually a former graduate student of mine at Carnegie Mellon when I taught at the high school there. So we're all over this, and DHCD is all over it. And I think we are trying, throughout the administration to really dig in on this housing issue. This is one piece, and I think we have to really keep focused on that. This is one piece that happened to come out of the General Assembly that we're trying to focus on. We won't solve all the problems, but I think we're providing really good data information that will feed into the bigger conversation going on. And so just assure people that there is a big amount of work going on right now. And you may even see things at the General Assembly in terms of new bills and whatnot that go forward this session. So stay tuned on all of that. And I feel really good about the piece that we're trying to do here. As the Maryland Department of Planning, we do tend to be the ones that get involved with regulation and zoning and facilitation and bringing things together. So I think it made sense. I wasn't sure at first, but the more I thought about it, it made sense that it was assigned to the Maryland Department of Planning. But obviously we work very, very closely with DHP. It's very evident as we look at this, the research is endless. We've had several people that have reached out to volunteer their services and their help. We are following up with them. We could really use some good, I think, graphic design illustrator type folks to really kind of look at these scenarios, and that, because I think visualization is so helpful. Organizing some of these panels that have been talked about, folks that would just grab on to things like that, I think would be tremendous. And so we are absolutely going to be taking up people's offers to the extent that it's focused on what we need, and maybe looking for a great grad student if anyone knows somebody who's working specifically in this area, if we don't already have names. And so there are all things that have to come. The other thing that I think you were alluding to, Deborah, which I know I worked with on the staff when we started this process, is what's the process? Because I'm a process person. And so we will put that back in front of you at the next meeting to understand that there is a process, that we are very strategically going through the steps of this, and we will need to turn the corner in January towards, with the end in mind, what's this final product going to look like and how are we going to get there? So we'll map that out and ensure that we share that with everyone at the next meeting. And I think that's all I really want to say, because I feel like you all have done such an excellent job of bringing up all of the things that we need to consider in this. And I'm sure Theo is also listening, really carefully as to how this relates back to this bigger issue you're all working on. So thank you for that. So thank you. We will, I think we, obviously, if you're like me, I drive 2 hours to get to here from the Eastern Shore when I'm in Baltimore during the week. So location really matters. We will pin that down in the next few days, so we can tell you exactly where we're all heading to in the next meeting and get that out to you very, very quickly. But have a wonderful, safe Halloween in whatever manner you celebrate that. And since we won't see you for Thanksgiving, have a wonderful day of being grateful in November. Thank you all.